Finny sighed and said to Harry. Okay, Harry, Hagrid is right about this. It has nothing to do with you. The thing Lu Wei is guarding is actually the Sorcerer's Stone. When Hermione heard this, she slapped her little head fiercely and said. I said how could I remember Nico Flamel but not the person? It turned out to be the Philosopher's Stone. Ron looked confused. The Philosopher's Stone? What is that? Feeney said calmly. It's an alchemical product. Well, it can turn stone into gold, and it can also be used to refine the elixir of life. Of course, it has side effects. Hearing this, Hagrid no longer cared about why Finny knew about the Philosopher's Stone, and looked at him with a puzzled look on his face. Hermione even asked. Side effects? How did you know? Feeney took out the soul stone he made during the vampire ambush at the beginning of this year from the pocket of his robe, and said to several people. Now, this is made based on the principle of the magic stone. Although there are some differences in essence, it's not big. It's the same thing. Seeing Finny casually taking out a stone from his body and calling it a magic stone, several people looked shocked. Especially Hagrid. He could go to Gringotts to take out the Philosopher's Stone himself. He had naturally seen the Philosopher's Stone. Therefore, he knew very well that Finny was not lying. The blood-red gem in his hand was really the magic stone. Although there are some subtle differences, they are very similar in shape and appearance. How do you have this thing? Harry and others asked in shock. Feeney shrugged and said. That's why I'm telling you, you're just overthinking it. This thing is really not that rare. Rare is rare. However, for many people, this is completely useless, otherwise I wouldn't care about it. Improvements were made to change its original capabilities. Ron still didn't want to believe it and said. What if Snape wants to live forever? Feeney sighed and glanced at Ron disappointedly. Compared with George and Fred, Ron is really terrible. His talent is pretty good, but he doesn't know how to work hard. He only knows how to play around all day long. The twins are also very naughty, but their grades in all subjects are not bad, and they even work very hard on alchemy, herbal medicine, and potions. Although their purpose is still for fun. But, Ron, he was really just joking, no reason, no goal, and he took Harry with him. You know, Harry has the title of Savior, so he needs to bear the responsibility of Savior. He also has the blood feud of the Potter family being exterminated. Ron's behavior can be said to be very distasteful to Finny. Today, Ron's stubborn thoughts and actions for the sake of face made Finny feel even more disappointed. Compared with other members of the Weasley family, Ron is really far behind. Snape is a well-known master of potions in the wizarding world. He may not be able to make the Philosopher's Stone, but if he wants to extend his life, he has many ways. Moreover, I remember I just said that the Philosopher's Stone is made by refining it. The elixir of life is flawed. Listening to Feeney's words, the smart Hermione keenly noticed the problem in his words and asked. Finny, why do you keep talking about the need for immortality instead of the elixir? Finny glanced at Hermione appreciatively and said. This is its flaw. It does not really make people immortal. The essence of the magic stone is still an equivalent exchange in alchemy. Extending life does not mean that you will not grow old. You can imagine that a person has lived for 500 years. But aging at the same rate as ordinary people, what will it be like? After hearing this, even a fool knows that the magic stone's effect is not as good as they imagined. Harry looked at Finny in shock, wanting to make sure what he said was true. Finny saw his thoughts, nodded and said. This is Nico's current state. He is holding heavier objects now, which will cause fractures, or even more serious ones. Because of the effect of the magic stone's elixir of life, he will not die from these injuries, but the torture he has endured but it won't be reduced at all. Ron frowned and said to Finny. Even if Snape doesn't want immortality, wouldn't he have the Midas touch? Who wouldn't want more galleons? Finny shook his head and said. Don't think about Snape with your mind. He is one of the top potions masters in the wizarding world. The potions he refines have never lacked buyers in the wizarding world, even because he rarely sells his own potions. Because of his work, every potion he refines has a very high price in the magic world. To put it simply, he is not short of gold galleons at all. If he is really short, he can just sell a few potions. There is no need to risk offending Dumbledore to steal the Sorcerer's Stone. Neville's eyes suddenly lit up, he looked at Finny and asked. So, who do you think is going to steal the Philosopher's Stone? Finny smiled and said. Let's put it this way, I think you all know the news about the attack on Gringotts not long ago, right? Everyone nodded, and Harry even said. I know, that's what happened the day Hagrid and I went to Gringotts. Feeney continued. So, it is certain that some people are concerned about the Sorcerer's Stone. Under such circumstances, why didn't Dumbledore hide the Sorcerer's Stone and put it in Hogwarts? You know, can Hogwarts still be there? What about the many little wizards who have no fighting ability? Hermione suddenly retorted. I've read in books that Hogwarts is the safest place in the wizarding world. Finney interrupted Hermione and said. If Hogwarts is really so safe, why didn't Harry's parents hide in Hogwarts in the first place? Hearing this, Harry's face showed a trace of disappointment. Feeney ignored it and continued. There are many ways to hide something in the wizarding world. I can think of several ways that others will never find. Even if Hogwarts is really so safe, why would Dumbledore do it? He said this publicly at the opening dinner. Although he didn't say what was hidden there, anyone who knew about it could guess that it was the magic stone. Just like me, I guessed it. Why do you think that is? Have you passed? Compared with the three simple-minded little lions, Hermione, as a little eagle, is naturally the one with the best brains. When Feeney finished speaking, she had some guesses that she couldn't believe. How can this be? This was the only thought in her little mind at this time, because if it was really what she thought, then this matter would be another situation. The change of expression on her face, as well as the hint of incredulity, were captured vividly by Feeney. He smiled and said. It seems that our little Hermione has thought of it. Yes, that's what she has thought of. As for what it is, don't say it. Let them think for themselves. What I want to tell you is that, like Snape, the professors who have taught at Hogwarts for at least 10 years are very trusted by Dumbledore. They will not antagonize Dumbledore because of some short-sighted ideas. Therefore, your previous thoughts are completely a joke. Harry's eyes lit up, he looked at Finney and asked. Since Dumbledore is guarding against someone, does that mean that this person is from outside the school, or is a new professor at Hogwarts? Feeney was very satisfied with Harry from the bottom of his heart. He was worthy of being the son of the world and the protagonist of this story. As a talented little wizard who can enter 4 houses, although Harry's Gryffindor characteristics developed faster because he was in Gryffindor, his characteristics in other houses did not disappear, but he also experienced some growth. It's really nice to realize the most obvious clue in this matter so quickly. You know, this clue is indeed obvious, but if you don't think of it, you will really ignore it. Feeney nodded and said. Today, all the professors at Hogwarts have taught here for many years. However, there is one exception, and that is the Professor of Defense against the Dark Arts, Professor Quirrell. Harry looked at Finney doubtfully and said. You mean Professor Quirrell? How is this possible? He. Feeney smiled and said. You want to say that he is timid and stumbling? Harry and the others nodded in unison. Finney laughed and said. You all underestimate him too much. You know, he was once a top student in Ravenclaw, one of the top students in his class, and he taught Muggle studies at Hogwarts a year ago. At that time, I never stuttered or was as timid as I am now. Not to mention, a year ago he was a very brave person who left Hogwarts to take risks to increase his experience and prepare himself to become the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor this year. How can such a person behave like this now? Neville looked at Finney doubtfully. In this case, why did Professor Dumbledore and the others? Feeney smiled and said. This is the reason for the question I asked before. I think most professors have noticed Quirrell's question, but they are waiting. Wait? Harry looked at his nominal uncle in confusion. But Feeney shook his head and said nothing. He said hello to Hagrid and left the hut towards the castle. Ron looked at Finney's back and curled his lips in disgust. He really hated this Slytherin who had a good relationship with his 2 brothers. He was second only to Percy. Hate. Harry, you don't really believe him, do you? You know, Snape is his dean, and he is Slytherin. Hermione looked at Ron and frowned. Why hadn't she noticed before that this person who was a little embarrassed on the train but was still okay would be like this? Rolling her eyes, she walked out of the hut and chased Finney. She had many questions to ask Finney, about the wizarding world, about Dumbledore, and her most emotional questions about magic. Neville let out a sigh of relief. He was really afraid of Finney, not only because of his parents, but also because he was the only one in the cabin who knew that Finney was a terrible figure in the magical world. The existence of true appearance. Hagrid heard Ron's words and said. Finney is different from those bad guys in Slytherin. He is trustworthy. Neville looked at Ron and Harry and said hesitantly. Ron, really don't provoke him. Provoking him is a terrible thing. Harry looked at Neville in confusion. In his impression, Finney had always been a very good brother, although he always wanted to call him uncle. Ron was also a little puzzled, not to mention Hagrid, who had a low IQ. Neville hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I've never told you about my parents." Harry nodded. This was true. They all knew that Neville was a pureblood wizard of the Longbottom family. They usually only heard about his grandmother, but never about his parents. Neville sighed, clenched his hands as if trying to use all his strength, and said, "My parents are Frank Longbottom and Alice Longbottom." When he heard these two names, Hagrid screamed in surprise. Obviously he knew these two people, and he really didn't expect that Neville would be their child. This also made him understand that Finney had what happened to the so-called apology. Neville did not stop speaking because of the scream, but tried his best to use a very calm tone, saying that his parents were tortured by Bellatrix Lestrange until they could only go insane. Describing how he could only live in St. Mungo's Hospital of Witchcraft and Wizardry all year round. Harry looked at Neville in confusion. What does this have to do with Finney? Neville took a deep breath and said, "Bellatrix Lestrange, formerly known as Bellatrix Black, is Finney's cousin." This last sentence made Neville, who had already exhausted all his strength, fall to the ground with some strength. Ron said a little unnaturally. "Even if it's his cousin, she's still locked up in Azkaban. What's there to be afraid of?" Neville looked at Ron angrily and said, "There is no such thing as a simple existence in the Black family. Although Finney didn't do anything to our family, you all know who is the captain of the Slytherin Quidditch team, right?" Harry nodded and said, "You know, Marcus Flint, that troll guy." Neville said, "He provoked Finney last year, and then the Flint family almost disappeared from the wizarding world." Ron opened his mouth in shock and looked at Neville in disbelief. "Are you kidding? I know, Finney is indeed very strong, but he is just a little wizard." Hagrid spoke at this time. "This matter is true. I also know it. In other words, most people in the magic world know it. Ron, you don't know it. Maybe it's because Arthur and Molly didn't tell you." Neville nodded and said, "Before I came to Hogwarts, my grandma specially told me not to antagonize Finney. She didn't talk about becoming friends with him, but she definitely couldn't become enemies. Although the Longbottom family has had a good relationship with the Black family in recent years, but once you really provoke Finney, you don't know what the consequences will be." After saying this, he paused and said, "I think other families would tell their children something similar, and, you know, Marcus almost died. This was one of the conditions for the Black family to stop attacking the Flint family. Although I don't know later, for some reason, Finney spared Marcus Flint's life. However, it is said that last year, he did not appear in Hogwarts for more than half a year. After this semester, every time Finney saw him, he nodded and bowed. I don't dare to provoke it at all." Ron and Harry couldn't believe Neville's words. Whether in Ron's eyes or Harry's eyes, Finney might not have a very good image, but he was still just a little wizard, even though Harry Lee knew that Finney was much stronger than his peers in many ways. At least when facing those adults, his attitude and expression were very relaxed, but he did not expect that Finney would be such a person. Finney was unaware of the conversation between the three Harrys. After leaving Hagrid's cabin, he went directly to Dumbledore's office. Dumbledore came back not long ago, and he naturally obtained the Resurrection Stone ring, so the Deathly Hallows that Finney wanted to study could no longer wait. You know, Christmas is only a month away, and Finney knows very well that Dumbledore will give Harry the invisibility cloak as a Christmas gift. By that time, he will have no chance to study the complete Deathly Hallows. "You came." Dumbledore was not surprised at all when he saw Finney come to his office. He had even been waiting for Finney to come to him. Who knew that Finney was so patient that he almost couldn't help but call Finney over? Finney is anxious to study the Deathly Hallows, and Dumbledore is also anxious. The Christmas plan has been set long ago, and he will not change it. Therefore, the time given to Finney to study the Deathly Hallows is limited, and Finney is anxious. If Ni doesn't take the initiative to come over yet, when the time comes, the time is too short, and Ni doesn't want to return it, so what else can he do to grab it? Finney nodded and sat casually opposite Dumbledore. Speaking of which, ever since he and Dumbledore signed an unbreakable oath, he began to act casually in front of Dumbledore and did not behave at all. "In front of me, I looked at the white wizard who surpassed the previous generation in the magic world. I thought you were waiting." Dumbledore snapped his fingers and summoned some desserts, placed them in front of Finney, and said to him with a smile. Finney shrugged and said, "I guess I won't have the chance to study all the Deathly Hallows after Christmas, so I can only come to you now. I still have more than a month to spare." Dumbledore nodded, opened the drawer of his desk, took out a cloak and a ring, and said to Finny. The invisibility cloak is nothing. As you can guess, I plan to return it to Harry at Christmas. However, the ring is a problem. Speaking of this, Dumbledore also looked frightened and said to Finny. Thankfully you told me in advance, otherwise I would really have been tricked. The resurrection stone has a great influence on me. If it weren't for your reminder, I would have couldn't help but wear it on my hand. Finny looked at the resurrection stone ring with interest and asked. Can the curse on this be broken? Dumbledore shook his head and said. This curse is tied to the Horcrux. As long as the characteristics of the Horcrux have not disappeared, it will not be unlocked. The Horcrux itself also has the characteristics of not being easily destroyed. Now I can know how to destroy the Horcrux. The only way is the fire spell, but this spell may also damage the resurrection stone, so there is nothing I can do. Finny sighed and said. Being able to destroy the Horcrux, madam, must be aimed at the soul, or a highly destructive magic or item. The death curse may be effective. However, using the death curse on a Horcrux, the prerequisite spell for creating a Horcrux, will appear. We are not sure what the consequences will be. The absolute destructiveness of the fire curse can also destroy Horcruxes. However, as you have judged, the resurrection stone will definitely be destroyed. As for other methods, all that comes to mind is the venom of the basilisk. When Dumbledore heard this, he felt a little regretful. At the same time, he felt a little sad that his former disciple was really a prodigal. What are the Horcruxes that he can identify now? Slytherin's pendant, Ravenclaw's crown, and the resurrection stone ring are all rare items in the wizarding world that are both magic items and antiques. Finny thought for a moment. In the original book, the Horcrux Harry destroyed for the first time was a diary, using the fangs of a basilisk, which was essentially the venom of the basilisk. After that, all his methods were based on Gryffindor. Of sword. Gryffindor's sword has the effect of absorbing all substances that can strengthen itself. Therefore, when Harry later used the sword to destroy the Horcrux itself, he may still have used the venom of the basilisk. However, Gryffindor's sword has existed for thousands of years. During this period, any wizard who meets the characteristics of Gryffindor can take it out of the sorting hat. In other words, it may have experienced countless battles. During this period, he probably also absorbed some qualities like the venom of the basilisk, which has an effect on the Horcrux. Thinking of this, Finny looked at Dumbledore and said, Professor Dumbledore, would you like to lend me Gryffindor's sword? Dumbledore's eyes lit up when he heard this. He also thought of Finny's judgment and felt that it might be true. Of course, he made this judgment because he was familiar with the sword, without the guidance of the original work. Yes, your idea may be valid, but how do you know that Gryffindor's sword is with me? Finny smiled and said. Except for Slytherin's locket, the other three's belongings were left at Hogwarts, right? Coincidentally, I happen to know about Ravenclaw's diadem, and I told you its clues not long ago. I also know the general situation of Hufflepuff's gold cup, and the only uncertainty is Gryffindor's sword. However, Professor, you are a Gryffindor graduate yourself and now the headmaster. If you say you don't know, I don't believe it at all. Dumbledore sighed and said. You are really suitable for Slytherin. The sword is indeed with me. As he said this, he summoned the sorting hat and said to Finny. Originally, this sword can only be taken out of the sorting hat by wizards who meet the characteristics of Gryffindor. It should not be lent to you. However, now that I think about it, maybe you may also meet this characteristic. Of course, still I'll remove it and give it to you. As he said that, he took out a sword from the sorting hat. The silver elf metal glowed with blue light, and Finny suddenly had a feeling that this sword was not just the sword of Gryffindor. However, he didn't have the time or opportunity to study this thing now. Instead, he struck the sword on the ring's ring. Although most of the Horcruxes of this resurrection stone ring are on the resurrection stone, the ring is also part of the Horcrux, and direct attacks on the ring can also achieve the effect. As the sword came into contact with the table, the ring's ring immediately broke open, and the black rhombus polyhedron fell on the table. It no longer had the weird aura that could lure the dark side of people's hearts. Finny smiled and returned the sword to the principal, then picked up the gems and invisibility cloak on the table and looked at Dumbledore. Principal, there is only one last thing left. Dumbledore nodded, put the wand in his hand on the table, looked at Finny and asked. How are you going to study the Elder Wand? You know, it is very loyal to its owner. Finny nodded, looked at Dumbledore, and said with a sneer. That's why I need your cooperation, Principal. Dumbledore glanced at Finny angrily, then picked up the wand again. Seeing this, Finny also took out his wand. Expelliarmus. A ray of red light hit the Elder Wand in Dumbledore's hand, and the Elder Wand flew up and landed in his hand. Dumbledore gave Finney a deep look. He acknowledged that Finney's taking ownership of the Elder Wand was essentially a test of Finney to see if he would return the legendary most powerful wand after he completed his research. Big wand. Finney looked at the Elder Wand in his hand carefully. If the joint-like elderwood staff body and the magic inscriptions engraved on the white background are full of powerful magic. No wonder so many wizards wanted to get this wand desperately. It was really tempting. Fortunately, Finney had already determined the material and style of his future wand, otherwise he might really be tempted and not return this wand to Dumbledore. Finney looked at the 3 deathly Hallows in front of him and fell into deep thought. After a moment, he raised the Elder Wand and waved it at a piece of cake nearby. Not to mention magic spells, even the normally required spell casting techniques were not needed. The piece of cake was directly turned into a ring with the resurrection stone embedded in it. The Elder Wand is indeed the most powerful wand. With it, Finney can not only cast spells directly and silently, but can even simplify the method of casting spells. Do whatever you want. Moreover, because of the Elder Wand, Finney always had a feeling that this piece of cake had really turned into a ring, and there would be no possibility of it returning to its original shape when the magic power was exhausted. Looking at the Elder Wand in his hand with great satisfaction, Finney put the ring on his hand and put on the invisibility cloak. He felt that since there was a saying that one could become the master of death by collecting 3 of the Deathly Hallows, there must be some basis for it. One reason why it has not been discovered for so many years is that no one has found all the Deathly Hallows. Another reason is that there must be some places in it that others have not thought of. So he had an intuition that perhaps these 3 items would bring some different gains when used at the same time. Looking at Finney disappearing in front of him, Dumbledore also thought of this guess. However, contrary to Finney, who had high expectations, he did not think that this method would unlock the secret of the Deathly Hallows, even though the Deathly Hallows had been around for so many years. They have never been collected together before, but there are still many people studying them, including the 3 families who inherited them. Each Deathly Hallows has been researched to have some special functions, even the Elder Wand, which often changes its owner, is like this. But this is still not the basis for Finney's guess. Finney completely disappeared under the cover of the invisibility cloak. I don't know if it was the effect of the resurrection stone. The traces of magic and aura that would have been exposed even when using the invisibility cloak disappeared. It was as if Finney was it's like this person has really disappeared. Gently turn the resurrection stone 3 times on your fingertips. A special light appeared in front of Finney's eyes, or a very special kind of white mist, covering him like a curtain. Then the mist shook slightly, and several figures walked out of it. The old, crazy-looking Walburga Black is very similar to Finney, and has the British gentleman style of Sirius, Orion Black, and Ray, who is also very similar to Finney, but more out of the box. Gullus Black. Even behind them, Finney could vaguely see some other figures, some of which seemed familiar, and some of which he had never seen before. This made Finney a little disappointed, but it was also a bit natural. He was disappointed that he didn't see some people he wanted to see in his previous life. Of course, not only was this world no longer the world he lived in, but it was also of black blood. It was expected that the resurrection stone summoned members of the Black family. Middle. However, unlike the legend, these souls did not say a word to Finney after they appeared, nor did they try to lure Finney to death. Instead, they surrounded Finney, emitting a fainter light. Vast. And those souls that Finney didn't recognize stood in front of him on both sides, revealing a passage forward. At this time, Finney also discovered a situation that made his hair stand on end. He was obviously still in Dumbledore's principal's office before putting on the invisibility cloak, and he had not moved around. However, at this time, the scenery around him changed. The surroundings became pitch black, and there was no light except for these souls. Vast. At the end of the passage is a river as wide as the sea, but the water is black. He vaguely saw a figure standing on the other side of the river, motionless, looking in his direction, as if waiting for his arrival, waiting for him to walk over and meet him, or should I say, is it him? Looking at the scene in front of him, an idea appeared in Finney's mind, an idea that frightened and panicked him. If his idea is correct, he may actually discover the truth about the Deathly Hallows, and may even find the path that many legendary wizards are looking for. And he believes that if his idea is correct, then as long as this idea is announced in the magical world, it will definitely cause a disaster that is no less than the witch eradication operation thousands of years ago. However, Finney hesitated. He knew that as long as he followed the path led by these souls, he would know whether his guess was correct and the real secret of the Deathly Hallows. However, he still hesitated. No matter how he lifted his foot, he couldn't take it forward, as if there was something blocking Feeney from taking this step. Feeney understood that what was stopping him was not something else but himself. He was hesitating because of the unknown and uncertainty about the road ahead. He didn't know if he could go back if he really went on and found the truth, or if he could go back along the way he came. I don't know what would happen if I really walked to the bank of the river and took off the invisibility cloak. Whether I would encounter some uncertain crisis or return to Dumbledore's office. Feeney had an intuition that the former was more likely. At this time, he took off the invisibility cloak and could return to Dumbledore's office and return to the original world. However, once he does go, what will happen is uncertain, and he may even never be able to return. It was precisely because of this intuition that he hesitated, wondering whether he should understand the secrets that were within reach, about the Presbyterian Church, about God, and even about the world. However, Feeney was very unwilling to leave this unknown place and give up these things that were within easy reach. The key is that his golden finger is still a crashing system. Before, 1 or 2 tasks would occasionally pop up. Now, let alone tasks, there is no chance that it will show its presence unless Fei-Ni summons it. As time goes by, Fei-Ni himself has almost forgotten this system that allowed him to be far ahead of his peers in the early stage. In other words, in the current situation, this system cannot give itself some answers or prompts. Whenever a task pops up, Feeney is determined to go on, but he doesn't. If it were before, Feeney would still doubt the place in front of him. This may be insignificant and not taken seriously by the system at all. However, after a holiday, less than half a year later, Feeney clearly determined that at this time, his system was really half dead. No matter how important or how small things were, there would be no response, and there would be no response. New mission. Feeney also tried to ask the system why there were no new tasks, but unfortunately he did not get any answer. After all, his system did not have any auxiliary intelligent programs. After thinking about it, Feeney made a decision. Now in the magic world, he still has a lot of things to do, and there are still many regrets from his previous life that have not been undone. There may be a chance to investigate the secret of the Deathly Hallows in the future, but if it is true, just like his intuition, if he can't look back if he goes on, then he will definitely regret it. So, he decided not to continue. However, as mentioned before, Feeney was a little unwilling to leave like this, so he moved the Elder Wand in his hand. Call the gods to protect you. As the spell and casting gesture are completed, a white smoke appears from the tip of the wand. Unlike the gray-white color of the souls around Feeney, the Patronus is brighter and brighter. The dark environment around us and the depressing atmosphere brought by these souls were relieved a lot after the appearance of the guardian angel. However, Feeney still discovered that using the patron saint here is more difficult and more expensive than using it under normal circumstances. After a while, the bright white mist gathered together to form the appearance of Feeney's patron saint, a cat. The cat Patronus jumped around Feeney, constantly releasing happy emotions towards Feeney, allowing his own somewhat sad and unwilling emotions to slowly dissipate. The surrounding souls also slowly retreated under the influence of the patron saint, and then began to dissipate. At this moment, Feeney seemed to understand something, but also seemed to understand nothing. Originally, he planned to use the patron saint to check ahead. As a result, the appearance of the patron saint caused all the surrounding souls to disappear, and then the road leading to the front also completely disappeared, along with the river in the distance, and the tall figure on the other side of the river. Looking at the reappearing bookshelves, candlelight, magic props, and the white-bearded old man around him, Feeney was sure of one thing. He returned to Dumbledore's office without taking off his invisibility cloak. Professor Dumbledore also seemed to feel something. He looked at where Feeney was standing with a look of confusion on his face. Feeney took off the invisibility cloak, looked at Dumbledore, opened his mouth, and wanted to say something. But Dumbledore got the better of him. Where have you been? Feeney shook his head. I have no idea. Dumbledore frowned and said. Let me first tell you what happened after you put on the invisibility cloak. When you first put on the invisibility cloak, everything was fine. I could still feel you standing there. Originally, I thought you would leave the office and go to the castle. After turning around, you suddenly disappeared there, without any trace of breath or magic. He paused and continued. Then I went upstairs, and I didn't see any clues about you in that model. It was as if you disappeared from Hogwarts. Oh, by the way, I have solved your confusion charm. You can go up and fix it yourself later. Feeney nodded, sat on the chair, and gasped. At this time, he felt that his robe was soaked with sweat. He originally thought that he had been in that unknown place for a while. Now it seems that there was a lot of pressure there, which made him sweat continuously until the sweat soaked his robe, which was enough to show that the place was not simple. I don't know where I went. When I first put on the invisibility cloak, everything was normal. When I touched the resurrection stone, I could feel that the effect of the invisibility cloak was strengthened, covering up the breath and traces of magic on my body. Then, for the purpose of research, I used the resurrection stone. After turning it 3 times, I could vaguely feel that the old wand in my hand played some roles that I didn't understand. Then I went to that place. Where? Dumbledore asked, but his eyes narrowed slightly, as if he was thinking about something or recalling something. I have no idea. Feeney shook his head and said truthfully. With the resurrection stone taking effect, I did see the souls of the dead, my mothers, fathers, brothers, and even some elders in the family, but they were not the only souls I saw. When Dumbledore heard this, his expression also changed. The soul is always the most mysterious realm that cannot be easily touched. Feeney saw the change in Dumbledore's expression, but he did not stop and continued. And among those souls, I saw James Potter and the members of the Gaunt family. Their crazy looks are something I will never mistake. He paused and continued. These souls were like guides, leading a path forward in front of me, and at the end of that road, I vaguely saw a river and a tall, invisible face on the other side of the river. Figure. This time, Dumbledore's face, which was originally not very good, became serious. A pair of blue eyes stared at Finney closely through half-moon glasses, and his slender fingers trembled slightly, as if he was on guard against Finney. What, and it seems that I am afraid of something. Feeney smiled softly, shook his head and said. I don't know why you are so nervous, Professor, but don't worry, I'm not stupid enough to go to such an unknown place. Dumbledore looked into Finney's eyes and asked. How did you come back? Feeney said. There was a voice telling me that as long as I took off the invisibility cloak, I could come back. Upon hearing this, Dumbledore suddenly stood up from his chair. Feeney ignored it and continued. But at that time, I had an intuition that if I really took off the invisibility cloak, I might never be able to come back, or in other words, it wouldn't be me who came back. Moreover, those souls gave me a kind of dementor. That feeling, so the Patronus charm was my first reaction, and it was also the right choice in my opinion at the time. Dumbledore looked at Finney and asked. Patronus charm, can you still use the Patronus charm now? Feeney understood that Dumbledore still didn't believe him at this time, so he relaxed his vigilance and waved the Elder Wand gently in his hand. Call the gods to protect you. I don't know if it was because of the magic spell he had used in that unknown world, but this time Finney used the surgical god Joe. It was as easy as drinking water, and using the fingers like an arm, instead of the white mist appearing first and then forming the Patronus like when the Patronus charm was used before, the cat Patronus appeared directly. Seeing this patron saint as white as the moonlight, Dumbledore's original nervousness suddenly disappeared, and he took a deep breath and sat on the chair. He wasn't sure where Finney went, but Finney's description and the meaning of the Deathly Hallows all indicated that where Finney went might be the end of it all. That's why Dumbledore was so nervous, because he didn't know whether it was Finney or some existence from that place who came back at this time. However, no matter where that place is, it is related to the god of death. Since it is related to the god of death, Guardian the magic spell of God's curse can no longer be used. Others may not know, but Dumbledore knows very well that Dementors are the clones of death, and the Patronus curse is the nemesis of Dementors, which also means that the Patronus curse cannot be used in Death's world. Therefore, when he saw the physical patron saint summoned by Feeney, he took a long breath and relaxed. However, he was still surprised that Finney had mastered the Patronus charm in the 3rd grade. He really didn't expect that Finney's talent would be so good. If Dumbledore knew that Finney not only mastered the Patronus charm, but also the Animagus, he would probably be even more shocked. After a moment, he spoke. Finney, although I'm not sure where that place is, I have some guesses. I think you've also thought of some possibilities. Finney nodded and said 2 words lightly. Grim Reaper. Dumbledore nodded and said in agreement. That's right, Gellert and I, oh, you should know, it's Grindelwald. We used to be very good friends. He and I once speculated that the Deathly Hallows might be more than just myths. Later we met the Saint Disciples and joined in. Of course, you should know that the saints I am talking about are not those under Gellert. Feeney nodded. Although I knew the saints before and knew that they firmly believed in the existence of the god of death and were keen on searching for the Deathly Hallows, I was very puzzled. But now, I doubt that they and the Presbyterian Church. Dumbledore nodded and said. You should know that I have been qualified to join the Presbyterian Church for a long time, but I have never joined. It is because I have always had some not very good guesses about the Presbyterian Church. I am a little off topic. At that time, Gellert and I, in order to confirm that the god of death is real, I traveled to many places and experienced many adventures. Finally, I got this information. Death, the underworld, is not the end but the beginning of the journey. Feeney said. Are you saying that the place I just went to is probably the underworld? Dumbledore shook his head. I think maybe the other side of the river you mentioned is the underworld, and the place you went to is probably a place where reality and the underworld intersect, an excessive place, because I have never seen or heard of it. Any news about the underworld, that can only mean one thing. Feeney continued what Dumbledore said. Because no one has ever been able to return from the underworld, there will be no information or records about the underworld. Dumbledore nodded. Maybe the Deathly Hallows will be an exception, but I can't be sure. So, Feeney, if you haven't done everything well and are really ready to start a new journey, don't use 3 weapons at the same time like today. The Deathly Hallows went to that place. Feeney nodded and said. I know. Originally, I thought the Deathly Hallows were just artifacts, and I might have learned something about gods from them. However, now it seems that these 3 things are not only artifacts, but also the keys to the underworld. Feeney was a little regretful. If he had known this, he would not have made a deal with Dumbledore on the condition of studying the Deathly Hallows. Because of the current situation, he really doesn't need to study the Deathly Hallows anymore. A good deal is wasted like this. Isn't it a pity? Okay, Professor. Take back the owner of the Elder Wand. As mentioned before, the Elder Wand is not necessary for Feeney at this time, or it is a bit redundant, because the wand that belongs to him is almost ready. Next, he will find an opportunity to customize it through the system. Dumbledore looked at Feeney in surprise, his eyes full of admiration. He didn't value the Elder Wand that much. The reason why he kept holding it was just to end the tragedy brought by the Elder Wand. As long as he died of old age normally and did not experience any defeat, the owner of the Elder Wand would not be changed. Similarly, when he died, the Elder Wand would not be able to transfer all because he was not killed, and there would be no possibility of changing the owner in the end. Now, Feeney can calmly return the Elder Wand to him, which makes Dumbledore most satisfied, because after all, the Elder Wand is an external object. If it can really make the owner invincible, then it would not have changed its owner so many times. Speaking of which, the trouble caused by the Elder Wand far exceeds its own value. In fact, in Feeney's view, the Elder Wand is just like that. Its strength lies in not limiting the magic power of magic. In fact, the Snakewood Wand can also do this. In fact, the characteristics of the Snakewood Wand make it more difficult to change the owner than the Elder Wand. Moreover, Dumbledore is here and will not allow him to really take the Elder Wand for himself. Knowing this, Feeney will naturally take the initiative to return the Elder Wand, and he can also improve Dumbledore's opinion of himself. Why not? As for the Resurrection Stone and the Invisibility Cloak, Feeney did not take them away. The Invisibility Cloak belongs to the Potter family. Dumbledore will return it to Harry later. He does not need to occupy it for a few days. As for the Resurrection Stone, Feeney felt that it was very strange after the previous experience, so he really didn't want to touch it unless it was necessary. The rest of his life was spent peacefully. Maybe it was because what Feeney said to Harry and the others in Hagrid's hut was different from their views, or maybe they didn't want to believe that what Feeney said was the truth. During this period, neither Harry, Ron, nor Neville came to see him. Hermione came to see him several times and asked some questions, but due to some actions of the Slytherin first-year students, she rarely came now. Feeney knew some things about Draco and the others, but he did not stop them. For the Slytherin students other than himself, they always divided Hogwarts into 2 groups, Slytherin and non-Slytherin. Hermione, whose parents were both Muggles, was a Muggle wizard who could take the top spot in Ravenclaw, a school full of academic masters, which was a big blow to them. Out of some childish jealousy, some irrationality, and even some other reasons, in short, the first-year snakes and even some little lions did not treat Hermione very well. To be precise, they did not treat everyone in Ravenclaw very well. After all, it was a school of weirdos. During this period, the weekly Quidditch matches were also in full swing. With Harry joining the Gryffindor Quidditch team, they also changed their previous decline and had a tendency to win the championship. Because there was no Gryffindor match next, Feeney did not go to watch the match. Even if there was a Gryffindor match next, he did not plan to watch it. The last time Quirrell's action was equivalent to telling Dumbledore that the plan had begun. Harry's safety would not be a problem next, so there was no need to watch this sport that he did not like so much. Of course, if it was a grand event like the World Cup, Finney might still be willing to watch it, well, if possible. Time gradually came to the middle of December, and Christmas was approaching. Unlike previous years, when Professor McGonagall was counting the list of students staying in school, Finney signed up. He did not choose to go home, but gave his house to Harry and Sirius, two fathers and sons, who had hardly met but had a deep bond, to communicate with each other. At the same time, he stayed in Hogwarts for some other purposes, such as Hufflepuff's Chamber of Secrets, which he had not found any clues to. Since December, Hogwarts has been covered by heavy snow. There are already several feet of snow in the courtyard, and the ice on the lake has become hard. Even if Hagrid dances on it, it will not crack. The little wizards began to use the break time to play snowball fights in the courtyard. Because of this, the twins were also punished. Ron couldn't stand the secret as always. What Finney said to them was immediately used as a topic of conversation in the Gryffindor common room, and he loudly announced it. This also led to many people knowing Finney's suspicion of Professor Quirrell. Although these little wizards tacitly did not tell the professors, they still caused a lot of trouble in Hogwarts. The twins were one of them. The brothers always believed in Finney's words, so they also thought that there was something wrong with the scarf on Professor Quirrell's head. However, the twins thought that since there was a problem, they had to put it into practice, so this scene appeared in Hogwarts. Several snowballs kept chasing Quirrell around, and finally hit the scarf on the back of his head. The twins were punished by Professor McGonagall for this. As for that time, Finney was standing in the corridor on the second floor of the castle, watching Quirrell being chased by Snowball across the courtyard, watching the snowball hit the scarf, and watching the scarf tremble a few times but did not fall. December brings not only snowball fights, but also Christmas and cold, especially in the Slytherin common room. Because it is under the Black Lake, even if there is a blazing fire in the fireplace in the common room, it still makes people feel cold. There is a window at the door of the common room, so you can open your mouth and breathe, and a sound will appear. White fog. This has also led to the fact that at this time, the Slytherin fireplace is occupied by senior students. Slytherin has its own small society. Except for a few special families, the senior students have a relationship with the lower students. Mandatory order. The so-called special families are the Black, Ridge, Selwyn, Greengrass, and Restledge families that Finney belongs to, which are very powerful pureblood families in the magical world. Of course, Draco can also hear, and the reason why he can stay by the fireplace is because of Finney. After all, the eldest son of the Malfoy family is the mad nephew of the Black family, and many pure-blooded little wizards cannot afford to offend him. "Uncle, aren't you going home this Christmas?" Draco looked at Finney, who was sitting next to him looking at the history of the wizarding world, and asked. Finney shook his head, smiled and said, "I won't go back. Sirius and I haven't spent much time together. He doesn't feel comfortable when I go back, and I don't feel comfortable either. There will be many opportunities after easing the relationship between brothers. Moreover, Harry should have lived in the Muggle world for so many years. It's not very good. Let Sirius get along with him this Christmas." Draco curled his lips when he heard this. Although Finney had made some moves to ease the relationship between him and Harry before, he still didn't like Harry. In fact, it can't be said that he didn't like Harry. He was still very dissatisfied with Harry. He wanted to be friends, but he really didn't like Ron. The two of them were like ice and fire, unable to get along well at all. Finney suddenly looked at Draco and said, "I heard that you bullied students from other colleges again in your herbal medicine class yesterday afternoon." Draco's face froze. He was still a little afraid of Finney, otherwise he wouldn't call this man who was not a few years older than him uncle, and he was also a person who liked to control him in everything. It's a pity that the reply he got when he wrote to his father was to tell him to listen to him. He was very puzzled by this but could only obey him. He usually followed Finney's side. It was because of Finney's teaching that he was praised in many classes. In fact, Lucius also has some goals of his own. Narcissa has very few real direct relatives now. Finney is one, and Sirius is one. However, because of the mysterious person, Sirius has no regard for their family. His attitude was not very good. On the contrary, Finney didn't care at all that he was a Death Eater before and was willing to take care of Draco. He was naturally willing to recognize this relative. Not to mention, the Black family is now more powerful than before, while the Malfoy family is much weaker than when he was in school. They're just some mudbloods. Besides, I didn't do anything to them. I was just joking. Although Draco felt that he might be reprimanded when Finney asked him about this matter, he still didn't care. In his opinion, those Muggle wizards were not wizards at all, but had a higher status than house elves. Just a little bit. Finney frowned when he heard this. He was very dissatisfied with Draco's attitude. I guess his attitude of looking down on Muggle wizards was taught by Lucius. No wonder the Malfoy family is not what it used to be. Draco, I hope you change your attitude towards Muggle wizards. I don't know how your father taught you, but you have to understand that Muggle wizards are also wizards. According to the research of some great wizards, we can even know Muggle-born wizards are much more talented than pure-blood wizards. This has been proven many times. When Finney said this, he did not lower his voice, nor did he take Draco to another place, in the common room of Slytherin, the school that values blood the most and looks down on Muggle wizards the most in Hogwarts. In front of many little snakes, he said this sentence that they thought was deviant. Draco opened his mouth to retort, but was interrupted by Finney. Let's not talk about talents, let's talk about the number of people. There are only more than 40 people in your Hogwarts this year, right? Among them, there are less than 10 people born with pure blood, including mixed blood wizards. There are about 20 people, and the rest are Muggle wizards. If you don't quite understand, let me put it another way. There are currently more than 300 young wizards in Hogwarts. Among them, less than 150 are pure blood wizards and mixed blood wizards, and the rest are nearly 300. 200 people are Muggle wizards, do you understand? Seeing Draco's face still full of doubts, Finney sighed and continued. This is not just the case in Hogwarts, but also in the entire magical world. The number of pure-blood wizards is constantly decreasing. We are far from the prosperous family we used to be. You are the only one in the Malfoy family now. You are the only one in this generation. This situation has appeared in almost all pure-blood families. But what about the so-called mixed-blood wizards? Most of them are Muggle-born wizards and Muggles, or Muggle-born wizards and Muggles. The union of wizards with Melon origins, in other words, in the entire magical world, true pure blood is about to disappear completely, not to mention that many families are nominally pure blood, but in fact they have intermarried with Muggles for a long time. Draco was still very puzzled, but some of the older wizards around him, or the wizards who had been trained by the family and had been exposed to the family industry, had already reacted. Finney sighed and explained. In other words, when we graduate, or even without us graduating, the magic world will no longer be a world of pure-blood families. We may still control the top building of the magic world and have the say in the entire world. At the beginning, the bottom class are all Muggle wizards or half-blood wizards. If we don't change our attitude towards them, then the final result will be just another war. More importantly, in the family industry we have, very few pure-blood family members will go to work in other families' industries, and our own family is also constantly declining and lacking personnel, and now the magic world the biggest human resource is the Muggle wizards who you have never looked down on. For them, we don't need to pay them as much salary as before. We just need to allow them to live in the magical world, and even give them more to make their lives better. You will be grateful for Dade's efforts in working for us, but you don't respect such cheap labor. When the number of people in a class reaches a certain level, it is necessary to change the methods and attitudes towards them. A few years later, most people in the magical world will be Muggle wizards, or wizards with Muggle blood. At that time, we need their support to do many things, whether it is industry or politics. You may have said that after graduation, you will not inherit the family business, nor will you enter the Ministry of Magic, the Molson Conference, these political center of power, but will choose a certain direction to study in depth, like Professor Snape, becoming a potion master. However, you must understand that no matter what you do, you are still in this society and can never be separated from society, unless you plan to continue to study magic, become a great wizard, become a legendary wizard, and enter the Council of Elders. Most of the wizards in Slytherin know the secrets of this magical world. In fact, they are not secrets. They are just hidden from Muggle wizards or mixed-blood wizards. Finney continued. I think you all know what it takes to become a legendary wizard and enter the Presbyterian Church. If you really had such a talent, you would have been sent to Skull long ago. Of course, there will be some among you. Some people, like me, actively choose Hogwarts instead of Skull, but in the final analysis, Skull is the easiest way to become a legendary wizard. What was originally just a teaching to Draco has now become a teaching to the little wizards around him. If you don't become a legendary wizard, you need resources, and resources must be obtained from society. Only legendary wizards can manage nothing and concentrate on studying the mysteries of magic and the world. Because of this, Skull, the wizards can completely ignore Muggle wizards, and they can even ignore pure-blood wizards, but you can't. As long as you are still in this society, you will need the help of Muggle wizards. Finney paused and continued. You can look down on Muggle wizards, you can be mean to them, and you can even take advantage of their cheap labor, but you should never divide them into two levels and two races. The relationship between wizards and muggles is already a mistake has been made in the magical world, a mistake that countless people have wanted to change for thousands of years but cannot. What we can do now is not to create a third society in a world that is already divided into two societies. Although Feeney's words were a bit complicated, many people understood what they meant. It was precisely because they understood it that they understood why their elders and parents told them not to be at odds with Feeney. It's best if you can make good friends with them. If not, then don't find anyone. Because they had different perspectives from the beginning, and Feeney stood higher than all of them. After all, Draco is still a child. After listening to what Feeney said, he only understood a small part. However, looking at the seniors and sisters around him, they nodded one after another and looked at Feeney thoughtfully. Said, "I understand, Uncle, I won't make fun of Muggle wizards anymore." Feeney smiled and nodded and said, "The prerequisite for others to respect you is that you have to respect other people, Draco, you have to remember this." After saying this, Feeney smiled and stood up from the sofa. "Okay, I'll go back to the dormitory first. I have classes tomorrow morning." With that said, Draco ignored Draco who wanted to say something and walked back to his dormitory. In fact, it was not only Feeney who had classes early the next morning, Draco also had classes, but the young master really didn't pay that much attention to learning. But it is understandable. After all, his family background means that he does not need to worry about after graduation. Nowadays, Hogwarts classrooms are the place where Feeney improves his grades. Although many professors will not ask Feeney to answer questions now. After entering the 3rd grade, Hogwarts students must take at least 2 elective courses in addition to the compulsory courses. Of course, there are also some people who try to complete all the subjects, such as the future Hermione and Biffany, who are 2 years older. Percy Weasley had completed all the subjects in his first year. However, Feeney did not do that. He took 3 elective courses, Ancient Runes, Divination and Numerology. Feeney, who has the heritage of Ravenclaw, can actually say that the Ancient Runes course is completely useless to him, and Feeney is now the professor's assistant in this class, often helping the professor explain some content. The only thing that helped Feeney in this course was meeting the ancient rune professor Bathsheba Bablin. Although this person is not the heir of Ravenclaw, he has still made great achievements in ancient magic texts by virtue of his own ability. Otherwise, Dumbledore would not have invited him to Hogwarts as a professor. Feeney often studies ancient magic texts with Professor Bablin after class. Their research focuses on improving the 2 books, Magic Symbol Collection and Advanced Rune Translation. After all, these 2 books were written a long time ago. At that time, the research on ancient magic texts was no better than it is now. Although it was not weaker than now, there were still some mistakes. Professor Bablin has been I am currently revising these ancient magic texts. The appearance of Feeney, who has the heritage of Ravenclaw, makes Professor Bablin ecstatic, because many of Feeney's insights on ancient runes are lacking in the wizarding world today. And those things are just medium difficulty information in Ravenclaw's inheritance. At the same time, Feeney also improved his understanding of ancient magic texts in cooperative discussions with Professor Bablin. Wow! A sound floated through the corridor outside the classroom. If you listen carefully, you can still vaguely hear the faint breathing of several people in the rushing sound. Feeney told Professor Bablin an idea and walked out of the classroom. He saw that the corridor was tightly blocked by a large fir tree, and the big feet under the tree and the breathing he heard before the sound made Feeney know that the person behind the tree must be Hagrid. Come to think of it, this fir tree is used to make a Christmas tree. Hey Hagrid, need some help? This is, Harry, Ron and Neville walked over from the other side of the corridor and asked. No, I can do it, thank you, Ron. Can you move out of the way? Draco's voice also came over, but his voice was a bit cold and had a long drawl. Do you want to earn some pocket money, Weasley? I guess you hope to guard the hunting grounds after graduating from Hogwarts. After all, Hagrid's hut is better than your original home. More like a palace. Although Draco did not continue to target Harry due to some reasons caused by Feeney, well, they still had some tit-for-tat confrontation, but it was not as tit-for-tat as in the original work. However, he still couldn't like Ron from the Weasley family, and the 2 of them started to fight each other whenever they met. When Ron heard Draco's voice, he turned around and rushed over. At this time, Snape came down the stairs. When Feeney saw this, the instructor lost his excitement and took out his wand and waved it at Hagrid's sad fir tree. The huge tree suddenly shrank a lot, and floated in the air with the wave of Feeney's wand. Ah, thank you, Feeney. Hagrid felt the fir tree on his shoulders lighten and then float. He turned to look at Feeney and said with a smile. Feeney shrugged and said. Are they sent to the auditorium? Hagrid nodded. Good. Feeney answered while controlling the fir trees in the air to float towards the auditorium. Hitting someone is against the school rules of Hogwarts. Therefore, 5 points are deducted from Gryffindor. Weasley, you should be glad that you did not deduct more. Okay, I think you need to leave here. Behind Finney and Hagrid came Snape's cold, bat-like husky voice. That's obviously not Ron's fault. Hagrid said to Finney a little unconvinced. Feeney patted Hagrid on the shoulder and said. Snape's dislike of Gryffindor was well known throughout Hogwarts, not to mention that his preference for Slytherin was never hidden. Hagrid sighed and said. Forget it, Christmas is coming soon, come with me to the auditorium to see it, it's absolutely wonderful. So, Feeney followed Hagrid and controlled the fir tree to the auditorium. At this time, Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick were both using magic to decorate Christmas decorations. Did Hagrid bring the last tree? Professor McGonagall saw Hagrid and said hurriedly. Hagrid touched his head sheepishly and said. Finney got it for me. Upon hearing this, Flitwick turned to look at Feeney, and then said with praise. Perfect shrinking spell and levitating spell, well done. If this were in class, I would definitely give Slytherin 5 points. Feeney shrugged and said. Actually, it's not necessary. All 3 houses except Gryffindor were given an extra 5 points just now. Professor McGonagall was stunned, looked at Feeney and asked. What happened? Feeney smiled and told Professor McGonagall what had just happened. At this time, Ron and the other 3 also walked into the auditorium. At this time, the auditorium looked spectacular. The walls were covered with hanging flower ribbons composed of balls and mistletoe. 12 towering Christmas trees were erected around it. Some of the trees also had some small shiny icicles hanging on them. There were hundreds of candles flickering. Want to decorate together? Professor Flitwick smiled and asked Feeney. Feeney also smiled and nodded, waving his wand and controlling the decorative items to decorate the fir tree that he and Hagrid had just brought in. How many days until vacation? On the other side, Hagrid was chatting with Harry, Ron, Neville, and Hermione, and asked. Hermione said. Only 1 day left. Neville seemed to have just remembered something, looked at Ron and said. Ron, I just remembered that Harry and I are leaving school, and you are the only one staying here for Christmas. So, during this holiday, I will trouble you to search for information in the library. Mr. and Mrs. Weasley are going to Nemaroa to see Charlie working at the dragon farm this holiday. Therefore, whether it is Percy, George and Fred, or Ron, they will all be at Hogwarts this Christmas holiday. I spent the time here. Ron heard this and said with some frustration. You and Harry are leaving school, and I'm the only one staying here. Harry thought for a moment and said to Ron. Well, maybe I could ask Sirius, maybe you could spend this Christmas with us. When Ron heard this, his eyes lit up, he looked at Harry and asked. Really? I get to spend this Christmas with you and Sirius? Harry nodded and said. I need to ask Sirius, but he should agree. After hearing this, Feeney couldn't listen anymore. Because Sirius had previously stated in his letter that he wanted to spend this Christmas with Harry at number 12 Grimmauld Place, that's why Feeney chose to stay at Hogwarts. There is no problem for Harry to go to number 12 Grimmauld Place, but there is a big hidden danger for Ron, a loudmouth, to go there. After all, it is now protected by the fidelity charm. But once Ron knows the address and tells it everywhere, it will be very bad. If it is a normal loyalty spell, you don't have to worry about this, because only the person who keeps the secret can tell other people the address, and only those who know the address can see it. However, the secret keeper of the Grimmauld Place fidelity charm was Finney himself. This led to the fact that after Sirius and Harry knew the address, because both Finney and Sirius belonged to the owners of this place, Harry naturally, he became another secret keeper. Feeney wasn't sure if Ron would become the new secret keeper if he found out. You know, Feeney hid number 12 Grimmauld Place not only to avoid being targeted by other pureblood families, but also to attack. There are also some preparations for things that will disrupt the magic world in the next few years. It's not that Finney doesn't like Ron, it's just that Ron really can't stand secrets now. Maybe in a few years, he will be able to keep secrets after experiencing a lot, but he definitely can't keep them secrets now. Because of this, Feeney spoke. He looked at Harry and asked. Harry, Sirius wrote to me saying that you will be celebrating the holidays at the Black Mansion this year? Harry nodded and was about to speak. Interrupted by Feeney. Wait, Harry, Sirius should have told you that the address of the old house must not be revealed under any circumstances, right? Harry nodded again, looked at Finney in confusion and asked. Yes, what's the matter? Finny glanced at Ron and said. If Ron wants to spend the holiday with you, maybe I need to tell Sirius to change the place. Black has many properties under his name, and only the old house is protected by my Fidelius charm, so, except you and Sirius, no one else can go there. When Ron heard this, he looked at Finny with an ugly look, and there was a hint of resentment in his eyes. Harry had some difficult and unwilling. But, Sirius. Finny interrupted him. Believe me, Sirius thinks so too. As for your belief that he will definitely agree to this matter, if it is in another place, maybe he will agree, but that place doesn't think it's possible. At this point, Finny paused, looked at Harry and said. In addition, as your godfather's brother, your uncle, Harry, I'm telling you one thing, in the future, if something is not certain and there will still be unexpected changes, don't promise others, even if there will be no unexpected changes, don't be so firm, because this will not only cut off your own way out, but also cut off the way out for others. Harry sighed, nodded, looked at Finny and asked. So, I can still spend the holidays with Sirius, right? Finny smiled and said. Of course, it's just a different place. Ah, I remember that I have a small island for vacation near the Scottish Highlands. How about you go there to celebrate the festival this year? Harry nodded. Good. Finny's smile became even brighter. Then, I'll contact Sirius. The two of them made some arrangements for the Christmas period in words. Although Ron was not allowed to go to the Black family's old house, they still were not allowed to stay alone in Hogwarts to spend this Christmas. Ron's bad mood because of Finny's rejection changed at this time, and he happily went to the library with Neville and Harry. After all, he is still a child and will not understand that the main reason why Finny rejected him before was the distrust in it. Ever since Hagrid leaked Nico's name, Harry and the three of them have been looking for Nico Flamel in the book. Although Finny told them everything. However, none of the three were completely convinced. They thought that the item that Snape was willing to give up his position as a professor at Hogwarts to acquire would not be something that even Finny could take out at will. Yes, they still believed that the person who attacked Harry and tried to steal Dumbledore's hidden things was Snape and not Quirrell, who had been told to them so clearly by Finny's analysis. If it were twins, they would believe what Finny said, not only because of their trust in Finny, but also because they could not let their own opinions of a person affect their judgment on some things. Obviously, Harry, who has just entered the wizarding world, Ron, the youngest boy in the Weasley family, and Neville, who grew up with his grandmother, have not done this. They are more likely to do it because of some of their own problems. The opinion of someone affects the judgment of some things. For example, in this case, they hated Snape, so the bad guy in this matter was Snape, simple and unpretentious. Unfortunately, these three people did not find any information about Nico Flamel. Even though Finny told them that this man had lived for more than 500 years, they still did not find it. The main reason was not that they couldn't find it, but that they didn't bother to look for it at all. The three people came to the library and said they were looking for clues about Nico Flamel. The Witcher has watched The Magic of Quidditch or just skipped it and doesn't plan to continue watching it. Neville was a little better, but he was still led astray by Ron and Harry. Watching the three Harrys leave, Hermione shook her head at Finny and said, "They didn't believe what you said before. Moreover, they said they were looking for clues, but they ended up just having fun." Finny smiled and said, "Maybe they already believe it, but their pride tells them that they can't believe it. That's why there is such a contradiction." Hermione looked at Finny with some confusion. Finny smiled and said, "It's just a comparison between boys, not to mention, Ron has a lot of opinions on me." "But why? Don't you have a good relationship with his brothers? I saw you chatting with George and Fred a few days ago." Hermione was still confused. Finny shrugged and said with a smile, "Ron is the most stubborn child in the Weasley family. In his opinion, there is no good person in Slytherin, and I happen to be a student of Slytherin. Not to mention, last year George and I were in the Burrow, the Weasleys teased him a lot." Hermione rolled her eyes. She still couldn't understand. It was clear that what Finny told was the truth and the logic in it was very rigorous. Why didn't they want to believe it? After saying that, Finny stopped chatting with Hermione and waved his wand to help Professor Flitwick decorate the Christmas trees. His wand sprayed out strings of golden bubbles and hung them on the newly moved tree. On the branches of the fir tree that came, some bells made by transfiguration and candies prepared by the house elves also floated to the trunk under the influence of the magic spell. Because the next day is the holiday, the dinner tonight is very grand. After the dinner, the twins and Lee Jordan found Finny. George and Fred sat next to Finny on the left and right, and put their arms around his shoulders. I heard that you asked Ronnie to spend Christmas at your house. You didn't even invite us. Listening to the twins' complaints, Feeny smiled and said, I won't go home this Christmas either. Why do you blame me? Upon hearing this, the two stopped arguing and looked at Feeny with blue eyes. So, are you? A new adventure? Let's go together. This time, even Jordan, who was ready to go home, was tempted and looked at Feeny. Finny, if you prepare for a Christmas adventure, I won't go back. I think Professor McGonagall won't mind leaving one more person in the school. Feeny shook his head and said, There is no adventure, I just want to try to see if I can find any clues about Hufflepuff's heritage. You still said you didn't take any risks. Fred looked at Feeny very dissatisfied. Feeny quickly waved his hand. I'm just looking for clues. I don't plan to go exploring on Christmas. However, it's not bad if you are at school and you can help me with some things. George nodded and asked. So do you have any idea now? Feeny shook his head. Not at all. Don't look at it. This Hufflepuff is the only one of the 4 founders who has complete records and left descendants. However, her affairs are the most mysterious. Jordan nodded and said. That's true. Everyone knows about Hufflepuff and knows that she has descendants. However, who her descendants are and where she died are uncertain. George sighed and said. It's really easy to find a founder who seems to have the most complete information, but actually has the least complete information. If you want to find her and leave a treasure. Fred looked at Feeny and asked. How are you going to find it? Feeny looked around and then said to the 3 of them. I'm going to go to the kitchen. George frowned. Don't we always go there? Ever since Finny told the 3 about the room of requirement, the 4 of them often stayed up late at night to party in the room of requirement. Because Finny's puffs could freely enter and leave Hogwarts, even in the first 2 years, there's no shortage of butterbeer from Hogsmeade either. As for the destructive food, it is taken from the kitchen of Hogwarts. The house elves there are very enthusiastic. Even if you go outside the normal meal time, they will prepare pastries for you. If you say you want to eat whatever, they will make it for you right away and will welcome you on your next visit. Feeny shook his head and said. I'm talking about the room behind the kitchen. George and the other 3 were stunned for a moment when they heard this. When they usually go to the kitchen, they will be surrounded by house elves as soon as they enter the door. They take the initiative to taste the food they made, and then provide them with what they need, and then leave. They never notice that there is something in the kitchen. There is a door. What's there? Jordan asked. Feeny shook his head. I don't know either, but it's precisely because I don't know that I want to take a look. George and Fred looked at each other, then looked at Feeny with gleaming eyes, and said excitedly. This is an adventure, we want to go too. Feeny nodded. It's possible, but I still don't know how we can prevent those house elves from noticing us entering that room, or how we can avoid being discovered. Jordan looked at Feeny with some confusion. Why not be discovered by them? Fred said completely nonchalantly. Just go in and the house elves won't stop us. George shook his head and said. Maybe it's not that simple. Feeny nodded. If there really is anything to do with Hufflepuff. George added. Then, I'm afraid those house elves won't let us in easily. Fred also reacted. That's not possible. If that's true, those house elves might reject us. After speaking, he and George said in unison. Then you won't be able to go to the kitchen to eat. Feeny nodded. So, I'm worried. If I use the disillusionment curse or the invisibility cloak elsewhere, there's no problem. However, it won't work in front of house elves. Jordan looked at Feeny doubtfully. But George gave the answer. House elves, like goblins, are very sensitive to magic. And their own magic will not be subject to other restrictions and can be used normally in Hogwarts. Jordan looked at Feeny thoughtfully and asked. You seem to have told us about this before. Puff is able to go to Hogsmeade because of this characteristic. Feeny nodded and said. By the way, do you want to go to Hogsmeade for Christmas? In the 3rd grade of Hogwarts, you can go to Hogsmeade to play around or during holidays with your parents signing a consent form. As the largest gathering place for wizards in the British wizarding world, it is actually bigger than Diagon Alley. Much more prosperous. Diagon Alley can be said to be a commercial street, although it is very prosperous. Even the Ministry of Magic has a branch there. However, Hogsmeade is more like a wizarding city. Although it is more like a village in terms of size, many Diagon Alley shops and business headquarters are located here. George and Fred's favorite place to go is Zuko's joke shop in Hogsmeade. Not only does it have their favorite prank props, it is also their goal to open a shop in the future. In their words, it means going to study in advance. Of course we're going. I heard that Joko has a new product. George and Fred still stated their plans one by one. Feeny nodded and said. That's fine. Let's go together the day after tomorrow. I want to find out if there is any way to avoid those house elves. And, to be honest, I don't think Hufflepuff's treasure will be in that kind of place. George laughed, put his arm on Feeny's shoulder and said. It doesn't matter if there is a treasure or not, what we care about is the process of getting there and what is there. Fred nodded and said in agreement. So don't think so much. Should we go there to have fun after today? The place he was talking about was the Room of Requirement. Even if it was a place with only a few of them, they would only use it to replace the Room of Requirement, because in the twins' view, it was already a secret base for a few people, and even many of their researches where it was completed there, and some semi-finished products were also placed there. Feeny nodded. Okay, just in time. I don't want to be in the Slytherin common room tonight. Tomorrow is the day off. Those people will be very noisy after today. The place they had the opportunity to choose in the Room of Requirement was Finny's bedroom, and the room where the twins did research was also there. Even people who knew the Room of Requirement would not think of this room, so it was safe there. Finny's room in the Room of Requirement also has a huge fireplace, which is lit at this time, heating the whole room. Fred and Jordan were sitting in very comfortable armchairs next to the fireplace, stringing up bread, pancakes, mushrooms, sausages and other foods with bamboo skewers and roasting them on the fire, while Feeny and George sat on the carpet nearby. Wizard chess is being played. Wizard chess is the same as Muggle chess, both in appearance and rules, but because of magic, the chess pieces are alive, and wizards can command them through words, just like commanding an army to fight. Of course, the most interesting thing about wizard chess is that each set of chess pieces is different. Only their owners can control and command them to play their greatest role. It is difficult for others, even those who are lent by their owners, to command them, because they don't trust you at all. The chess pieces often point fingers at the wizards, making people dizzy. But such a thing is completely unnecessary for Finny and others. Originally, George and Fred did not have their own chess pieces. The Weasley family only had 2 sets of chess pieces. One set was given to Ron by their grandfather. Although it was public at home, anyone could use it, and the other set was Arthur's, just like Ron's set, which was public at home. However, last year, Finny gave George and Fred each a set of brand new chess pieces. As for Jordan, they were the ones he had as a child. Although they are a bit old, because of the tacit understanding they have built over the years, many times, his chess pieces know what he is going to do before he even gives any instructions. As for Feeny's own set, it was specially customized. Each chess piece was engraved with the Black family's emblem, and the overall materials were better than ordinary chess pieces. The next day, the 3 people rubbed their heads and got up from the bed. They played a little crazy last night and drank a lot of butterbeer. Later, they even asked Puff to get some red wine. As a result, they all felt headaches the next day. Because Jordan was going home for Christmas, he left the Room of Requirement early in the morning and took a carriage to Hogwarts Station with the other little wizards who were returning home for the holidays to take the Hogwarts Express home. When the 3 Feenies woke up, they had been gone for a long time, and the 3 of them didn't care that they couldn't see Jordan off from school, or in other words, they didn't even think about seeing him off. Because of drinking last night, the 3 of them spent the first day of the holiday in a complete trance and with headaches. With Puff coming regularly to deliver food, the 3 of them slept and woke up, and finally regained consciousness at night. I don't think I'll drink with you again in the future. Finny rubbed his head and complained to the twins. George nodded. Absolutely no more drinking. It's so uncomfortable, but, George, you said. Before Fred finished speaking, George understood what he meant. You mean, invent a candy that will make you feel drunk after eating it? Fred nodded, and he and George high-fived happily to celebrate having another very interesting idea. Feeny touched his chin and said to the 2 of them. I remember that there is a poisonous mushroom in the Forbidden Forest. It is not very toxic. If you boil it and eat it, you will have some mild hallucinations and headaches. Fred's eyes lit up, he looked at Feeny and asked. What kind of mushroom do you remember? Feeny shook his head. Seeing this, George sighed, a little frustrated. Feeny said. Although I don't remember it, there is someone who must know it. George was stunned for a moment, and then said. Is it Hagrid? Fred also remembered after being reminded. Yes, he lives right next to the Forbidden Forest. He is the most familiar with the Forbidden Forest. Feeney continued. Actually, you can also go to Professor Kettleburn or Professor Sprout. Professor Kettleburn lives in the Forbidden Forest, and he has raised many magical animals. There may be magical animal products with similar effects. As for Professor Sprout, as a master of herbal medicine, she must have many ways to use herbs to achieve similar effects. George and Fred looked at each other, then looked at Feeney and said, "How about we open a joke shop together?" Feeney shook his head and said, "Forget it, that's your dream. It wouldn't be good if I got involved. Moreover, although the Black family doesn't have many people, it also has some unconventional branches. If I intervene, it will definitely make the Black family the leader. Yes, there is nothing I can do to change this." There are two reasons why Feeney rejected George and Fred's proposal. One reason is that, as mentioned before, the Weasley family does not need charity from others, even borrowing money. If Feeney intervenes to open a store with the twins, they will definitely not let Feeney pay. At most, they will provide them with some inspiration clues like now. For Feeney at this time, some inspiration is completely unnecessary. Not to mention that he had no intention of letting the Black family get into joke merchandise. The second reason is that if he intervenes, he will definitely occupy a dominant position. This is not only because of the reclusive branches of the family, but also because of the Black family's status in today's magical world. If Feeney participates in the twins industry and does not take a dominant position, it is equivalent to telling the magical world that the Black family can provide some investment services, and it is the kind that will not seize power or affect your operations. Many pureblood families like this will use the joke shop as an inducement to let the Black family participate in investment. This cannot be rejected directly. Just like what Feeney said before when he taught Draco, people have to live in society. Favorites and family transactions are inevitable. If the Black family does not occupy a dominant position, it will be equivalent to losing investment. That part of the money was given to those families, which Feeney didn't want. When George and Fred heard Feeney's refusal, they sighed in disappointment. Feeney smiled and said, "Why are you sighing? The reason why you asked me to open a store together is just because you want to do something with me. Isn't it good like this? I will provide you with some inspiration or methods. You can do it yourself. Opening a store, you know, I am one of the heirs of the Black family after all. Even if Sirius comes out now, he does many things, but after all, my identity is here, and every move I make represents Black. So you'd better do it yourself." Having said this, Feeney paused and continued. "Perhaps I will have some products for sale in your store in the future." George was stunned and looked at Feeney doubtfully. Feeney explained. "Some things may not have anything to do with the Black family, and your store has nothing to do with the Black family." George nodded thoughtfully, but Fred hadn't figured it out yet. Feeney sighed and said, "To put it simply, I may need some industries separate from the Black family in the future as my personal assets. Now, my relationship with Sirius is pretty good, and we don't need to manage the family's industries. We just need to collect profits. However, after all, we have never really lived together, and many things are uncertain in the future. However, as I said before, my every move will be related to Black, so the most I can do is to borrow your store to sell products." Fred nodded, indicating that he understood. "So what do you want to sell?" Feeney smiled and didn't speak. He did have some ideas, but now they were just some ideas. In his memory, there were many products suitable for joke shops for twins. Just like the Hearthstone-like cards in the novels he had read before, this was a good idea. However, in Feeney's opinion, selling cards was still a little bit worse. He wanted to make a game similar to Warhammer in his previous life. The money-making point of cards lies in collection and exchange. The quantity of different cards is different, which will make some cards more valuable. In addition to selling card packs, you can also sell individual cards. However, these are all necessary, that is, this kind of card game can make customers pay. In the environment of the magic world, it is easy for little wizards to pay for card games. After all, there is too little entertainment here. The common wizard chess, gobstone that few people play, and Quidditch that everyone is interested in, but nothing else. However, the things that young wizards will like are not necessarily the same as adult wizards. Muggle wizards, or mixed-blood wizards, and even some pure-blood wizards who are not from the same family simply do not have time to play card games after graduation. They prefer most of them are for family and work, and they have to work hard and have headaches. As for wizards who come from a family, they have to take over the family's industry after graduation, and they don't have time to play card games. What they need is to learn how to deal with other families. If they make their family stronger, they also have to fight with other families. Contacts between the Ministry of Magic, the Namor Deep Council, the Council of Elders and other organizations. But Warhammer-like games are different. In Feeney's hypothesis, heroes and soldiers will still be composed of population. However, the race will be changed to that of the current magic world, and the heroes will also choose legendary wizards and great wizards who are famous in the magic world. At the same time, customized services can be provided for some people. And because of the effect of magic, those chess pieces will have the effect of simulating the characteristics of the original chess piece, just like a noseless chess piece, then it will have the immortal characteristic of a Horcrux. As for why Feeney thinks this game will be better than a card game, it's actually because of the previous relationships between various families in the magic world. Although the previous exchanges and dealings between families were often based on interests, when talking about interests and making deals, the head of each family will judge the strength of the two families in their hearts, and if a family war breaks out, they will how to do it. And this is the role of chess pieces, used to simulate war. Organizations such as the Ministry of Magic can also use chess pieces to simulate war and make the best political decisions, etc. The young wizards can also use these chess pieces to learn how to control the family and the family's previous interest exchanges and political entanglements. And don't forget that in Feeney's previous life, the Thresh chess piece itself had a profit point in painting, which is what Feeney hopes to achieve. With chess piece customization, you can not only customize the appearance of chess pieces, but also the effects and abilities. Of course, it will be more expensive. For example, if Sirius wants a chess piece of his own, he needs to find a store that sells such chess pieces and customize them at a high price. However, the chess pieces produced in this way only have the skills, attacks, and effects of normal hero chess pieces. If necessary, his unique magic, such as Animagus, will cost you more money. Of course, you can also directly customize chess pieces with special skills without customizing the appearance. Moreover, Feeney also plans to sell the rare cards in the same way as the cards. Some precious chess pieces can only be purchased in blind boxes or purchased individually. By the way, Feeney does not intend to sell fixed racial battle packs like Warhammer in its previous life, but plans to use the form of card packs. Of course, the basic combat power will still be displayed in the form of battle packs. Realize returning to the present and not thinking about the escape path that Feeney left for yourself. After listening to Feeney's explanation and statement, and seeing that Feeney didn't want to talk about his future plans, George and Fred stopped asking him about the matter. This was also one of their rules for interacting with friends. Will not explore the bottom line. The three of them tidied up and left the room of requirement. Originally, Feeney's plan was to find a way to enter the kitchen room in the past 2 days without alerting the house elves. However, the party with George, Fred, and Jordan last night caused the three of them to lose the entire day today, leaving Feeney with no time to think about this solution. Although the Christmas holiday also lasts for half a month, there are some other circumstances that need to be taken into consideration. Feeney was definitely not allowed to explore the kitchen during the 2 days before and after Christmas. Because of Feeney, Harry did not stay at school on Christmas Day as in the original work. This not only ruined the original work, but also affected Dumbledore's life. Plan. In Dumbledore's plan, he wanted Harry to see the Mirror of Erised during the Christmas holidays. This would strengthen Harry's determination to fight against the mysterious man, and also help him understand Harry's character. Have a heart. Otherwise, he would not have returned the invisibility cloak on Christmas Day. Unfortunately, because Feeney rescued Sirius, Harry did not stay at Hogwarts on Christmas Day, but went to an island estate owned by the Black family. Festival. Feeney knew this very well, so he had to stay quiet during the 2 Christmas days, otherwise Dumbledore might get into trouble with him. He knew this old man very well. Speaking of which, a legendary wizard was as naughty and petty as a child in many cases. This made Feeney quite speechless. Not to mention, Feeney is still not sure that Hufflepuff's inheritance is really related to the room in the kitchen. If the exploration time is delayed too far and then finds that his guess is wrong, then, this Christmas it's a pity that the vacation was wasted. Therefore, Feeney could only explore the kitchen room tonight, even if there was no way to avoid the attention of the house elves. Of course, if he can't get in tonight, Feeney will find a way to do it again later. With the help of the Marauder's map, the three of them evaded the inspections of the Professor and Filch, and went from the 8th floor of the castle where the room of requirement was to the basement level below the auditorium. This is the entrance to the Hufflepuff common room. There is a picture of a table with fruits on the wall next to the pile of buckets at the entrance to Hufflepuff. Just scratch the pear on the cartoon and it will laugh and turn into a doorknob. Open the door and you'll find the Hogwarts kitchen. This is directly below the school auditorium. There are also 4 long tables in the kitchen, which are in the same position as the 4 college tables in the auditorium above. When the meal is served, the house elves will place the food on these long tables, and then under the influence of magic, it will go to the corresponding position in the auditorium. There are usually hundreds of house elves working here, and their resting place is also in the closet in the kitchen. Including the house elves who are usually responsible for the hygiene of the dormitories of the 4 colleges also live here. This is one of the reasons why Feeney doubted that Hufflepuff's heritage would be in the kitchen. Regarding the idea of like Warhammer, as I said in the text, card games still have some limitations. Although in the magic world, the bonus income of magic must be very high. However, Warhammer, a tabletop simulation game that is aimed at people regardless of age, is more suitable, so I chose this one. In addition, I don't know much about Warhammer, so please forgive me if I am wrong in some places. In addition, in order to adapt to the situation in the magic world, I have made some settings changes. After all, businessmen put their interests first. Finally, this idea and setting will not appear in the early stage. It only involves a little bit here, so if you don't like it, you can skip it. Well, it is mainly for the sake of excessiveness. Even if you say I am watery, I will accept it. Everyone in the wizarding world knows that it was Hufflepuff who accepted house elves, which made this creature a servant of the wizarding family. And all the house elves in Hogwarts are here, so naturally it will be related to Hufflepuff. It is said that the reason why Hufflepuff's common room is next to the kitchen is also said to be there. Of course, there is also a theory that it is because Hufflepuff students like food, and it is more convenient for them to build the common room next to the kitchen. Come to the kitchen. Many house elves discovered the 3 Finneys as soon as they came to the kitchen. When the house elves saw Feeney and the others arriving, they neatly stopped what they were doing and looked at the 3 of them. After a moment, there was a scream from nowhere, and then the house elves started to act randomly. The group, thinking about Feeney, the 3 of them crowded over. During the pushing and shouting, a young house elf who was very familiar to Finney and the 3 of them came to Finney's side and asked, "Dear Master Black, Master Weasley, may I need anything?" Feeney heard this and nodded. This is not the first time they have come here. Every time they come here, these house elves are like this, as if they have been frightened and panicked. However, in fact, it's just that these house elves want to serve a few people. Before Feeney could speak, the familiar house elf used magic to create a set of tables and chairs in the corner of the kitchen, and took Feeney and the 3 of them to sit there. The other house elves around them didn't need any instructions from the 3 of them, and immediately got busy, constantly bringing fried eggs, bacon, milk, steak, bread, fried chicken legs, fruits and other food to the 3 of them. There was no need for the 3 Finneys to open their mouths, and the food in front of them was already piled up. "Dear young masters, do you need anything else?" The house elf asked again, as if the previous trouble was just a greeting gift for them. In fact, this is the case. Every time Feeney and the others come over, they have to go through this. After that, they will say that they want to bring some food and leave, or want to eat something. The house elves will immediately rush to meet their requests. Feeney pointed to his target this time, which was the door in the kitchen, and asked the house elf. Duo, what is that room in the kitchen used for?" Duo, the house elf they were particularly familiar with, answered with great respect. "Sir, there is the kitchen warehouse, and our cemetery." Duo told Feeney the truth without hiding anything. It's a pity that this answer disappointed Feeney. House elves can't lie, which means that there is really no place to hide Hufflepuff's treasure. Although disappointed, Feeney was still a little interested in this so-called house elf cemetery. "Has it always been your cemetery?" he asked. Because he suddenly thought of something, if it had always been their cemetery, that is to say, it was the cemetery when Hufflepuff was here, and Hufflepuff would put the clues of inheritance in the cemetery of the house elves. Not impossible. Duo nodded and said to Feeney. "Yes, Master Black, that has always been our cemetery. Ever since Ms. Hufflepuff brought us into Hogwarts, that has been our cemetery, and we are honored to be able to enter there." Sure enough, just like Feeney's guess, it still needs to be seen there. "Well, Duo, can you take me in to have a look?" Feeney asked. Duo hurriedly bowed and nodded and said. Of course, Duo will take Master Black in, and ask Master to follow Duo. After hearing what Feeney said, Dwedwa's attitude became obviously more respectful. This is also related to the customs of house elves, or the contract in their blood. Because house elves have the right of ownership, even after they die, they still belong to their master and their master's family. And as their master, if you can go to the place where they rest after they die, even if you just pass by, it will be the greatest honor for them, and this kind of honor is far more than entering the cemetery passed down from generation to generation. Important. This is also the reason why the house elves of the Black family dream that their masters can put their heads in the corridors for decoration after death, because in that way, the masters can often pass by. Feeney gestured to the twins, indicating that they should stay here, and he followed Duo there. Although George and Fred were confused, they still nodded and did not get up when Feeney made the gesture. Feeney followed Duo through the short wooden door at the back of the kitchen and came to an empty room. In one corner here are piles of cabbage, potatoes and other vegetables, in another corner is an enchanted freezer with meat and eggs, and above the room are some bacon. It can be seen that this is indeed the warehouse of the kitchen. This is not the final destination for Feeney and Duo yet. Duo took him to the very back of the warehouse, between vegetables and meat. It found an iron chain here and pulled it up under the influence of magic. As the chain moved, a downward hole appeared in the ground. Climbing down the stairs at the entrance of the cave, Feeney and Duo came to a stone tunnel. On the stone walls on both sides not far apart is a candle. Feeney was not sure what material these candles were made of, but the flames on them did not sway due to the wind driven by him as he walked by, and even after burning for a long time, the candles did not fade away. These candles are made from oil refined from the corpses of house elves, so they are very resistant to burning. Duo seemed to notice Feeney's doubts and explained. And his explanation also shocked Feeney. He had always known that Hufflepuff saved the house elves. However, for some unknown reasons, the house elves did not think that Hufflepuff saved the house elves. What she did back then was not good for them, but she was particularly admired. However, now that he saw the thousands of candles on both sides of the tunnel, he realized that his guess about what Hufflepuff did back then was far from enough. Hufflepuff not only transformed house elves, a distant cousin of goblins and elves, into today's wizard slaves, allowing them to serve the wizards while they were alive, but also developed many methods of using the corpses of house elves, and these means are now lost, but these candles still represent something. Feeney continued to follow Duo forward. The tunnel began to widen, and the candles on the stone walls on both sides became denser. There were also some dead bones on the ground. Looking at the size of those bones, a small part of them might be domestic animals. Elves, and mostly goblins and elves. Duo, what are these? Feeney still couldn't hold back his curiosity and asked. Duo turned to Feeney and bowed and said. I'm very sorry, Master Black, the scene here frightened you. Feeney waved his hand and said. No, I'm not surprised, I'm just curious, who are these bones? Duo said. I don't know the specific details, but according to the legend passed down by the clan, these were once a stronghold of the goblins when they were judged by the goblins. Feeney frowned. He didn't quite agree with this statement, but he didn't say anything. Because apart from this statement, he could not think of any other reason. When all options are eliminated, the remaining one will be the correct result no matter how absurd it is. No longer thinking about the bones that were filled with bones around him, Feeney continued to follow Duo forward for about 10 minutes. If it were on the ground, he would probably have arrived underground in the Forbidden Forest. They finally arrived at their next destination, an empty space underground and connected to the Hogwarts kitchen. Feeney discovered that there was a huge iron pot here. There were some flames burning under the iron pot, and inside the pot was a green, viscous liquid with a pungent smell. Master Black, that's where the bodies of the house elves are disposed of. Duo pointed to the iron pot and said to Feeney. Feeney was stunned. He thought that after a house elf died, the body should be buried in the soil. But in the end, it was boiled in a pot. Can't we share food after that? That's a joke. Of course this was impossible. After careful observation, Feeney discovered that the iron pot actually just looked like an iron pot. In fact, that object has a track connected to the bottom of the iron pot to drain the liquid in the pot. There are small holes on the track, allowing part of the liquid to pass through the holes and stay under the track. At the end of the track is a huge, square pothole. Inside the pit are grinding tools for candles. It seems that the candles on the left and right stone walls in the tunnel were made in this way. The iron pot is where the corpse is boiled and the oil is extracted, the track is where the oil is filtered, and the final pit is where the candle is cooled. Upon closer inspection, it turns out that there is another device above the iron pot. It is a sieve plate with corpses on it. There are enchanted knives on the bones, which are constantly peeling off the muscles on the bones. Organize. There were several house elves on the sieve tray. After seeing the arrival of Duo and Feeney, they hurried over. Hello, dear young master, Duo, what are you doing here? After greeting Feeney, the house elf asked Dodo. Duo shook his head and said. Master Black wants to come to the cemetery to have a look. Duo will bring the young master here to have a look." The house elf then breathed a sigh of relief and continued to snap his fingers to control the bones in the sifting tray that had no meat scraps to fly to the pit nearby. Feeny looked around and saw that there were already many bones inside. Duo introduced. "Hogwarts house elves will be sent here after they die, and their grease will be refined to make candles to light the Hogwarts castle." Only then did Feeny know that the candles and flames in the castle, except for Goobler's fairy fire, were candles made from the corpses of house elves. Duo continued. "The corpses that have been refined will be sent to the pit over there. House elves that die within 300 years will be placed in the same pit. When 300 years pass, that pit will be." Only then did Feeny notice that next to the pit, there were 3 stone tablets with some numbers written on them, which turned out to mean this. Feeny said he couldn't understand the unique funeral form of the house elves at Hogwarts, but he also had some guesses. Perhaps the house elves in Hogwarts have such a custom because Hufflepuff did it intentionally. After all, even the candles made from the corpses of house elves will burn out one day, and at this time, according to Feeny's judgment based on the burning conditions of the candles he saw before, it is roughly about 300 years. Coincidentally, the longest lifespan of a house elf is only 300 years. Feeny didn't believe this was a coincidence. Combined with the goblin and elf bones he saw in the tunnel before, Feeny had to suspect that the rumor circulating in the wizarding world that Hufflepuff saved the house elves was wrong. The truth is that there is another rumor in the Pureblood family. Hufflepuff created house elves, which can also explain the contract in the blood of house elves. Looking at the empty space around him, Feeny felt that it would be better to look for it by himself, so he said to Duo, "I'm walking around here alone, you don't have to follow me." Then he ignored Duo and took the lead in walking towards the basic stone monument where the bones of many house elves were buried. Compared to those empty spaces without anything, Feeny felt that this place was more likely to contain clues. Sure enough, the earliest of the 3 stone tablets was built a few years later than the time when Hogwarts was established. This was inconsistent with the legend in the wizarding world that Hufflepuff saved the house elves. After all, she couldn't save a bunch of house elves who didn't live long. Instead, it was more likely that the first generation of house elves she created was buried here. What's more interesting is that the inscription on this stone tablet says that Hufflepuff personally erected the stone tablet here. In order to commemorate this event, the house elf specially recorded it. You know, the cemetery was built not long after Hogwarts was founded. At that time, even if Hufflepuff was just a child, he would never live to see the day when the stone tablet was erected. After all, the stone tablet could only be erected 300 years after the cemetery was built. So either the house elves lied and the stone had nothing to do with Hufflepuff, or Hufflepuff lived to that time, which was consistent with some rumors in the wizarding world. Regarding the theory that Hufflepuff is not dead. You know, the records of Hufflepuff are different from those of Ravenclaw and Slytherin. She disappeared just like Gryffindor, but Hufflepuff's disappearance was more interesting. Gryffindor disappeared after Slytherin left Hogwarts. Based on the information found by Feeny and the notes left by Gryffindor, he has determined that the big octopus in the Black Lake is Gryffindor. Many people. And Hufflepuff is interesting. She still lived after the death of Ravenclaw, and because of her existence, her descendants established their own families and occupied a certain position in the magical world. Even during that period, one of the consul families in the Presbyterian Church is her descendant family, and the 2 are in-law families, which can be said to be extremely powerful. Then, she disappeared. There were no rumors of her death among her family, and no one had ever seen her body or her cemetery. However, if she did not die, no one would see her or even hear from her in the next 1,000 years. You know, Nico Flamel, who has lived for 500 years, has been rumored in the magical world, confirming that he is still alive. Hufflepuff's life and death are unknown since the day she disappeared. Therefore, it is not a strange thing that the stone tablet here was really built by Hufflepuff. On the contrary, the appearance of this stone tablet may confirm some speculations in the magical world. You know, what Hufflepuff is most famous for is not saving house elves, nor establishing Hogwarts with 3 other people, let alone her cooking skills, but her achievements in potions. When Hogwarts was established, she began to sort out all the potions that appeared in the world at that time, and developed many more convenient potions and refining methods. She also integrated the basis of potions to make the entire original in that era, the profession of herbalist, which only wizards and squibs could engage in, became part of the wizarding system. Because of this, many people in the magic world believe that she may have also refined the elixir of life, even one that can be refined without using the magic stone. Another wizard with the same rumors in the magic world is Hirebo. This person invented the Horcrux. He was a very powerful dark wizard in his early days. In his later years, he spent a long time pursuing immortality. And Feeney happens to know that this person is really alive now, and his origin is sealed in the Atlantic Ocean, and there are some legendary wizards in the Presbyterian Church who go to the seal every year for rotation. Looking back to the present, Feeney found no other clues except that the stone tablet might have been erected by Hufflepuff himself. I can only change my mind and look at other places here. As mentioned before, except for the equipment for refining candles and the 3 cemeteries here, the entire space is empty and devoid of anything. Even though this place is really big, it is so big that Feeney begins to wonder if the entire forbidden area is. The whole forest was hollowed out. Since Feeney didn't find any clues in the cemetery, he only had one choice left, which was the equipment that he didn't want to get close to from the bottom of his heart. Not to mention the unpleasant smell of blood and rotting corpses, the air seemed to be filled with an aura of death and decay. However, for the sake of the task, Feeney could only endure his discomfort and stood up, raised his feet, and walked towards the iron pot. In fact, the reward for this task is not very generous. Feeney has long been able to learn the magic of apparition and master it quickly. After all, the most difficult part of this magic is to feel the pressure and discomfort caused by space when teleporting. Feeling, and this is something that Feeney, who has relied on house elves for transportation since he was a child, has long been accustomed to. The reason why he completed this task so seriously was because he felt that although this task of exploring the inheritance left by the 4 founders was a side task, it was related to the main line. You must know that Feeney has activated the only main mission is to explore Hogwarts, and if you want to complete this main mission, you must find and enter the remaining secret rooms of Hufflepuff and Slytherin. Moreover, the system has not seen new tasks for a long time. Although Feeney does not think that the existence of the system can provide him with any help, it would be a good thing if new tasks can appear, as long as he can there is no short-term goal, so he is also thinking about whether a new task will appear after completing one task, or whether a new task will appear after completing the main task. In short, no matter what the reason is, Feeney has to find Hufflepuff's inheritance secret room. Not to mention, the inheritance of Gryffindor and Ravenclaw can almost be said to be the strong foundation for Feeney today. The heritage of Hufflepuff at this level must not be underestimated. Naturally, there are no characteristics or clues about the place where the gel candle is located. It is just a huge earthy mold, which only appears in the shape of a pit. On the track, perhaps due to the grease flowing over it for thousands of years, a thick layer of grease has solidified on it. The original appearance of the track has long been invisible. Presumably, it is not Hufflepuff who will leave clues. Place. Regardless of whether Hufflepuff is a kind-hearted wizard who saved the house elves, or an evil-hearted wizard who created the house elves. She thought she was an elegant lady, and a lady would obviously not leave clues in a place like this. Then, there is only one choice left for Feeney, and that is the iron pot, which is the place with the worst smell. Feeney couldn't stand it after just a few steps, and hurriedly cast a bubble-head spell on himself to isolate the smell. It's not to mention that this spell, which was originally invented for swimming, is quite effective in isolating smells. With a huge transparent sphere on his head, he looked like a celestial dragon in a certain pirate comic, which was ridiculous. However, this ridiculousness gave Feeney a good psychological hint in actual personal experience. Ignoring the green viscous liquid in the iron pot that obviously had no clues, Feeney focused all his attention on the iron pot itself. The huge iron pot was engraved with many patterns, with many strange, long-extinct herbs, and many magical creatures that existed thousands of years ago. Some of them held weapons shaped like spears in their hands, and some spread their hands. The cyclone-like breath swirled around, and they tore and killed among the herbs at the same time. Although Feeney has never seen such a scene, the background of this scene is very familiar to him. It is a part of Hogwarts. It is also a place where few young wizards set foot, but there are many young wizards. Longing place. That is the forbidden forest of Hogwarts where entry is not allowed. It can be said that it was obtained without any effort. Feeney had to lament that the time and energy he spent before was really a waste. He really didn't expect that Hufflepuff would leave the clues of his inheritance so obvious. Because this was not the first time he had seen Tu Huan carved on the iron pot. The moment he saw the pattern on the iron pot, Feeney remembered that he had seen similar patterns on the candles in the Hogwarts castle with the Forbidden Forest in the background, and even in the Hogwarts kitchen. The murals also look like the Forbidden Forest. Obviously, unlike several other founders, Hufflepuff really did not hide his heritage, but placed it in the most conspicuous place where everyone can see it. However, everyone thinks that such an existence should be extremely mysterious and difficult to find, so they ignore the clues and answers that are readily available. Shaking his head with a wry smile, Feeney really felt like an idiot. I stood up with a self-deprecating smile. After I realized something in my heart, everything changed when I read this article about underground space. It was originally so empty that Finney wondered why it was so big. Now, it is not so out of place, because this is also a clue. Since the underground space is in the Forbidden Forest, then, Hufflepuff's inheritance secret room, why not in the Forbidden Forest? Of course, the Forbidden Forest is huge, so big that it covers the entire Scottish Highlands. The previous statement that this underground space hollowed out the entire Forbidden Forest was actually just an exaggeration. However, now this huge Forbidden Forest has had a great impact on Finney. The secret room clues left by Hufflepuff are only the Forbidden Forest, and there is no specific or slightly more precious location information. And the entire Forbidden Forest is so big, trying to find a secret room is like looking for a needle in a haystack. Finney sighed and shook his head and walked to Duo, who had been waiting for him. Okay, Duo, let's go back. Not a lot. Okay, Master Black, do you want to walk back, or should Duo take you back directly? Finney was stunned for a moment and said. You can take me back directly. Then why did you have to walk here? Duo was obviously stunned for a moment, without thinking, and then hit the stone wall next to him. So many bad things, so many stupid things. Finney shook his head helplessly, so he said that he didn't like the house elves of other families and public houses. They were too rigid and boring. It was the house elves of the Black family that he had trained since childhood that he used smoothly and comfortably. Okay, I order you, stop punishing yourself. Finney said helplessly and sternly. Upon hearing this, Duo immediately stopped its head that was already bleeding from hitting the stone wall, turned around and blinked its big watery eyes to look at Finney, waiting for Finney's next order. Take me back, I'm a little tired. Finney sighed and said. Duo then hurriedly ran to Finney's side, carefully took Finney's hand and disappeared with a snap of his fingers. The next moment, they were back in the Hogwarts kitchen. At this time, George and Fred were still eating in the kitchen, but this time it was not a meal but some fruits and after-dinner snacks, pudding and the like. When they saw Finney return to the kitchen, they looked over subconsciously, with a hint of questioning on their faces. Finney nodded, then shook his head, signaling the two of them not to ask. The three simply took away some food and left the kitchen. After some dodging and tossing, I returned to the room of requirement on the 8th floor. After closing the door tightly to make sure that no one would be eavesdropped, George looked at Finney and asked. How's it going? Do you have any clues? Fred also looked at Finney with curiosity, waiting for his answer. Finney nodded again, then shook his head. Fred was more anxious than George and asked directly. What does this mean? Those who are nodding and shaking their heads, do you have any clues? Finney sighed and said. There are clues, but the clues are actually not very useful. As soon as these words came out, George and Fred became even more curious. They looked at Finney eagerly, waiting for his explanation. Finney spoke slowly and told the twins everything he saw underground about the house elf's funeral. The two of them looked a little ugly when they heard this. They had never thought that house elves would be used by wizards after their death. However, this is not about sympathy for house elves. Coming from the magical world, they know very well that house elves are servants of wizards, not only during life but also after death. Therefore, it is not so difficult to accept that the body is used. What they find difficult to accept is that it turns out that Hufflepuff is such a person, and the rumors about her in the wizarding world may be wrong as Finney guessed. Finney continued. Finally, I found a clue in the iron pot. Combined with some previous discoveries, I can confirm that the treasure is in the Forbidden Forest. Fred asked. But why are you shaking your head? Finney sighed and said. Because there is no clue to the specific location, the only clue is the Forbidden Forest. And do you know how big the Forbidden Forest is? George and Fred had been in and out of the Forbidden Forest more than once, and had some understanding of the place next to Hogwarts. They both sighed. The Forbidden Forest covers the whole of England. In fact, many herbs and magical creature materials circulating in the magic world are products of the Forbidden Forest. We want to find a treasure there, then. Is it just looking for a needle in the sea? Finney nodded. That's why I shook my head, because if there is a clue, it means there is no clue. It will have no effect at all. The three of them sighed together and sat helplessly on the ground, looking at each other. No one spoke, and they didn't know whether they were disappointed, frustrated, or planning to give up. After all, both the twins and Finney have certain expectations for Hufflepuff's inherited treasures. Now, this expectation has not been achieved or has been broken. The whole fantasy of treasure hunting had been shattered. How could the three of them not sigh, feel frustrated and disappointed? Finney turned his head and looked in the direction of the Forbidden Forest through the window of the Room of Requirement, feeling full of reluctance. He had been looking for Hufflepuff's heritage treasure for 3 years, and he really didn't want to give up now. Willingly. What can you do if you don't give up? Are you really going to wander into Forbidden Forest looking for a needle in a haystack? In heavy atmosphere, 3 of them lay down and fell asleep again. A night of silence. When Feeney woke up, twins were still snoozing. One was sleeping on his lap, and he was holding their waist. Their talent and Gryffindor vibes made them chill about everything. They loved sleeping in, especially since it was holiday time. Feeney shook his head, walked over to table by window, sat down, and snapped his fingers. Puff, who was always on duty, got it right away. A cup of coffee appeared in front of him. Feeney took a sip, still thinking about Hufflepuff inheritance. Forbidden Forest is full of all kinds of magical creatures and herbs, both dangerous and safe. These things show there's plenty of food around. If you think about it, they're all food. That's what Miss Helga Hufflepuff believed. So, clues from cemetery under kitchen might be spot on. Yesterday, when he met twins, Feeney didn't mention he wasn't sure if clue was legit. There were reasons for that. Even though many clues pointed in that direction, Forbidden Forest is massive and clues are vague. It's easy to doubt. Feeney didn't think any past Hogwarts students or professors had considered Hufflepuff's inheritance. Anyone who did wouldn't ignore a place like kitchen. Reason no one's found a Hufflepuff heir in Wizarding World is probably that clues seem too fake. But if he could think of this, others could too. So, Hufflepuff must have other secrets. He'd rather make a mistake than let it slide. Feeney knew he had to try, whether clue was true or not. Finding 4 founders' inheritance wouldn't be easy. Those were 4 founders of Hogwarts, legends in Wizarding World. Back then, even church couldn't overshadow Hogwarts. If not for later events and founders' disappearance, Hogwarts might still be on top. Now that he decided to take a shot, Feeney thought about where treasure might be in Forbidden Forest. First off, he was sure it wouldn't be deep in forest, far from Hogwarts. Hufflepuff's treasure is part of exploring Hogwarts. So, treasure should be somewhere within Hogwarts boundaries. If he put in effort, he could turn Forbidden Forest upside down and find treasure in a month or so. Puff. He sighed, calling Puff over. Feeney knew it wouldn't be easy to find anything alone. But without prep, even he couldn't just stroll into Forbidden Forest. Even a great wizard needs a team to explore there. Even then, there can be casualties. Master. Puff appeared right away, waiting for his orders. I need a map of Forbidden Forest, just around Hogwarts. Puff bowed and vanished. Feeney watched Puff go, then took a breath and decided to enjoy his rare vacation. 2 groans came from Room of Requirement. Feeney heard them, put his coffee down, and turned to see twins waking up. Are you awake? He smiled, amused by their weird sleeping positions. Bah, bah, bah. George grumbled, looking at Feeney, Finny, why does my mouth taste so weird, like old vinegar? Feeney couldn't help but laugh, really loud. George and Fred looked confused. After a moment, Feeney stopped laughing and said, maybe it's Fred's feet. They smell pretty tasty when you're sleeping. Pfft. He burst into laughter again, and George and Fred started playfully fighting over it. Time flew by, and Feeney finally interrupted them. Okay, you 2 can mess around later. We should go eat. Fred looked puzzled. Just as he was about to ask why they were going for breakfast, George tackled him again, and they were back to wrestling. Feeney sighed, Puff's busy, so he didn't have time to make breakfast. Let's head to kitchen. I want to ask house elves a few things. Twins stopped their antics and headed to kitchen with Feeney. House elves were still super eager to serve them. But this time, Feeney felt a bit different. He realized they'd be treated as objects by humans forever, and he felt a pang of sympathy. But as someone benefiting from house elves, Feeney wouldn't be foolish enough to try to free them like Hermione did in original story. That would hurt his own interests and upset entire magical community. It's a shame Hermione didn't get that. If she hadn't married into Weasley family, who were heroes against Dark Wizard, and didn't have ties to Harry, she probably wouldn't have made it to Ministry of Magic's top. During war against Dark Wizard, many pureblood families were hit hard. They didn't realize how useful house elves were until it was too late. If they had, even with Hermione's connections, she might not have become Minister of Magic. Shaking his head, Feeney pushed those thoughts aside. He looked at Duo and asked, Duo, I have some questions for you. Duo hurriedly bowed. Master Black has questions. I'll answer anything I know. Feeny nodded. Do any of your house elves have records about Miss Hufflepuff? Like her favorite spot in Forbidden Forest? Duo looked confused. That's a common question. Ms. Hufflepuff didn't have a favorite spot in Forbidden Forest. She loved house elves. I won't say anything bad about her. Feeny thought about this. If he could think of it, others could too. Hogwarts has been around for ages, and thousands of students have passed through. Some must have been clever enough to think like him. Fact that Hufflepuff heritage hasn't been found yet made him think it wasn't easy to figure out. He wanted to confirm his thoughts. If others had asked similar questions, it would mean he wasn't wrong. If just one person thought this way, it might be wrong. Two could be a coincidence. But if three or more thought same, it had to be true. Only question was whether those before him had found other clues about treasure's location in Forbidden Forest. If not, it made sense why there's been no news of Hufflepuff's legacy for so long. But if someone did find something, it meant treasure was dangerous. Those looking for it either died or couldn't get it open. Even though he didn't want to admit it, Feeny felt it was likely that people had died trying to get to treasure. After breakfast, twins dashed outside for a snowball fight with other students who stayed at school. Feeny went back to Room of Requirement and entered his private library. He needed Room of Requirement because it was unlikely anyone else would come here. It wasn't totally safe, but safer than an empty classroom right now. With everyone on vacation, professors and students had time to roam around, so an empty classroom could get crowded. Feeny searched his books for anything about Forbidden Forest related to Hufflepuff. Even a simple mention would be super important. Unfortunately, by time evening rolled around and twins came back to find him for Christmas dinner, he hadn't found anything about Hufflepuff and Forbidden Forest. Christmas dinner was just a name since it was Christmas. Meal wasn't much different from usual. Main difference was that all students who stayed at Hogwarts came to Great Hall for dinner. Yesterday, school closed for holidays. Students who went home left early for London, while those who stayed had their own parties with food in common room. It was nice for students like Finny to head straight to kitchen. Many knew where it was, like Hufflepuff, but lots of others didn't. Most people wouldn't pay attention to kitchen's location. Only those who liked late-night snacks or adventures would notice. Today, professors like Dumbledore joined students to spend Christmas with those who couldn't go home for holidays. Ding, ding, ding. Professor Dumbledore tapped a goblet with a silver spoon, making a crisp sound that grabbed everyone's attention. He spoke slowly. Merry Christmas, everyone. Your gifts will be under Christmas tree in your common rooms by tomorrow morning. Don't open wrong ones. Today, we have butterbeer from 3 Broomsticks Pub. Enjoy. Now, let's eat. With Dumbledore's brief speech, feast began. Unlike Halloween dinner, there were no performances tonight, but everyone felt warm in hall. People might have lost loved ones or couldn't be with family, but it didn't matter because this was Hogwarts. Friends felt like family here. Since they'd get gifts next day, twins didn't follow Finny back to Room of Requirement after dinner. They headed to Gryffindor Common Room instead. For Finny, it didn't matter since Puff would deliver his gift under Christmas tree in Room of Requirement, so he didn't need to wait in Common Room. When he returned to Room of Requirement, Puff was back from Forbidden Forest. Why are you back so late? Finny frowned. Even though Puff was a house elf, as his personal guard, she had special training. With his amazing talent, Finny could explore the magical world freely. But wasting a whole day in the Forbidden Forest? That felt off. Puff said, Puff got attacked in the Forbidden Forest, so he came back late. Finny frowned. Who attacked you? Puff shook his head. Not a wizard. It was magical creatures, centaurs, trolls, and acromantulas. As a house elf trained by Finny, Puff knew a lot about magical creatures, especially the dangerous ones from when Finny was young. So, it made sense he recognized them. Finny found it odd that Puff, with his magical skills, hadn't been spotted by those creatures while operating. How did he get attacked? Puff, tell me what happened today, Finny urged. Puff nodded and explained. After taking Finny's order, he went to the Forbidden Forest and used apparition to quickly navigate and map the area. At first, he was fine. The magical creatures near Hogwarts didn't bother him. But then he ran into acromantulas, which shouldn't have been there. While mapping the terrain, several acromantulas attacked him, spraying venom and webbing. Luckily, Puff escaped using apparition. Following Finny's training, Puff fought back. He unleashed house elf magic, knocking down the acromantulas. But their numbers kept growing. Despite Puff's strength, he started to tire and realized he needed to retreat. He marked the area as dangerous on the map for Finny. Puff remembered Finny planned to explore the Forbidden Forest, so he wanted to clear the area of threats. He planned to return with other house elves from Black's old house to deal with the Acromantulas soon. However, after leaving their territory, Puff stumbled into Centaur territory. Centaurs usually don't attack unless provoked, but they went after Puff the moment he entered. They threw wooden spears at him, but Puff easily stopped them. However, the centaurs didn't stop there. They set traps, rolling stones, and wooden spikes. They didn't listen to Puff's explanation, they just wanted to attack. Finny's eyes narrowed as he realized something big was happening. It seemed there was deep-rooted hatred between the centaurs and house elves. This reminded Finny of Hufflepuff. House elves served pureblood wizards and rarely entered the Forbidden Forest. The hatred likely stemmed from a long-ago conflict, possibly during Hufflepuff's time. Hufflepuff was known as a savior of house elves, and it made sense that the centaurs would have a grudge from then. This thought made Finny believe the rumors about Hufflepuff's inheritance in the Forbidden Forest were likely true. The centaurs' aggression hinted the treasure was connected to them. Why else would Hufflepuff venture so deep into the forest? Many creatures found deep in the forest also exist outside, just less frequently. Rare creatures like unicorns prefer the deeper parts of the forest, hiding from danger. Finny set aside his thoughts and focused on Puff, asking him to continue. Puff explained how the centaurs' sudden attack surprised him and stopped him from mapping their area. This upset him since he took his mission seriously. Instead of escaping, Puff fought back without killing. He controlled the spears to injure but not kill, using vines to restrain the centaurs. Unfortunately, the centaurs didn't appreciate his efforts and attacked even more fiercely. They charged at Puff, ignoring the spears flying around. Their reckless charge led to casualties among their own, making the centaurs even angrier. Puff realized he needed to escape, but they pursued him relentlessly. Centaurs can sense magic, so even when Puff fled, they followed his traces. Puff took the chance to note the terrain for the map. The chaos caused by the centaurs stirred up other magical creatures in the forest, leading to random attacks. Puff managed to slip away from the crazed centaurs, but they were too focused on hunting him down, ignoring their own tribe's troubles. This chase was why Puff returned to Hogwarts. So, it was just the Acromantulas and the centaurs attacking you? Finny asked, stroking his chin. Puff nodded, yes, master. They were the only ones. Finny thought aloud, Acromantulas are vicious and will attack anything in their territory. That makes sense. But the real issue is the centaur tribe. They're hostile to house elves and are right next to Hogwarts, where many house elves live. It's strange they haven't attacked Hogwarts. Finny realized that the reason no one found Hufflepuff's treasure was likely because house elves couldn't enter the Forbidden Forest to talk to the centaurs. Puff handed Finny his detailed map of the terrain, which was even better than the ones sold in the magical world. Puff marked locations of magical creatures, plants, and a safe route into the forest. He also noted the size of each creature's territory, streams, caves, and ruins. With this map, exploring the Forbidden Forest would be much safer for Finny. If he had different plans, he'd sell this map. It would help adventurers and wizards survive better and find rare magical plants. But Finny had other ideas. There were too many dark creatures in the forest, and until the dark wizard was gone, he wouldn't risk sharing this map. On the map, Finny saw Puff had marked the centaur tribe and the surrounding area. Coincidentally, there was a cave nearby. And even more coincidentally, there was something near that cave that would drive anyone crazy.